Okay, let me get my phone off and then I'll be ready to go. Okay, so let's begin the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for May 14th, 2014, with reminders to please turn off your cell phones and please take extra conversations out into the hall. And just a reminder, once we finish with the Sconset geotube project, people who want to exit the room, please exit quickly and quietly. Thank you. We are making an audio and visual recording of this meeting. If anybody is going to record any part of this meeting, please let us know. Okay, Pete, you'll be recording, I assume, the SBPF project. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Okay, so let's start the public meeting with public comment. Anything from the public on matters that will not be heard tonight? Okay, seeing not, then we'll go to the public hearing notices of intent, and we'll start with the Town of Nantucket SBPF, 85 through 107A Baxter Road. This is the geotube project.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sitting on this.
Oh, okay. And before we go on, I just want to mention that the Nantucket Islands Land Bank at 17 and 19 North Liberty and 8 Wesco Place is continued to the 28th. If there's anybody here that came specifically for that hearing that can't come back, okay. Okay, Steve. Yeah,
yes, please.
So, Mr. Chairman, I hope this is we're able to keep this as brief as possible. I submitted a very short filing on Friday that provided a small amount of new information for you in response to some questions. I think that it's simple enough that I don't need to go through it, although happy to answer questions. I also submitted a very brief summary of the regulatory analysis that you would have to go through. I could have submitted an extensive, comprehensive analysis, but I think that I would save us all that trouble unless you want to go through it. Again, I think that it's somewhat clear in its face, and if there are any specific statutes or rules that you'd like to discuss, we could discuss them, but I don't feel the need to review them unless you'd like to. And I don't know if Kara wants to add anything.
Basically what we wanted to do was just let you know that we'd like to have approval for what is there with monitoring so that we could see what the effects are going to be. And we would hope that the Commission would agree to that and condition the order of conditions for triggers that, should there be any issues, that we would have to review those with you and make a commitment to address those as they are found. In the letter that Steve presented, it did outline some additional information that arose after the last meeting, but we hope that that is in fulfillment of the questions that were expressed and would allow you to come to a decision.
So you said what is there, but do you still want the returns and the...
If the Commission so chooses.
Okay. Okay.
Real quickly, this is not part of the hearing, but if anyone has questions when we get to the public comment, please use either one of the microphones so it gets on the recording and through the speaker system so everyone could hear. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions from the Commission? Okay, anything from the public? Yeah, Mr. Raghavan.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Dirk Raghavane. I represent the Quidnet Squam Association. As you all know, I've stated it. I have to restate it every time I'm here. They are a group of property owners to the north of this project, downdrift from the impacts, and the reason they are concerned about the project and continue to be concerned about the project is because of the impacts that this project will invariably have on their properties to the north. I put a few comments in writing. This is not a summation of my comments from previous meetings. Oral testimony is also as valid as written testimony. And so we reiterate all of the concerns we've expressed previously. In addition to that, we adopt concerns expressed by others that we don't really want to just have to constantly restate. Matters such as triggering devices when squam starts falling into the ocean. We would like this project to be removed, obviously, but we need you guys to work on what are the mechanisms that you think are appropriate for what triggers that. I want to just focus on a few things because it's kind of troubling the way this has come up here. On the first page, halfway down, it's a section called Temporary Status of the Project. And I went back and spent some time looking at the videos, and indeed you do need people standing by microphones because it's really hard to hear people when you're in the upstairs room and they're sort of standing in the middle. But if you look back at the record, and you can pull out sections yourself and look at it yourself, I've identified one specific place here. This project was represented to the Commission. And before that, it was represented to the DEP up at Sconset Bluff in Mr. Posner's house, that this was a temporary project. It was temporary. What was temporary was the project that was temporary. Okay? The project was temporary because it was an emergency, because the road was going to fall in, and we had to secure the road while the town found ways to relocate the road. And the conversation over a number of meetings was about a temporary structure. How long would it have to be there? Kara at one point said the town was looking at 2 or 3 years. All right, that's what we were looking at. Now it has been shuffled around and we're being handed something different, which says it's a temporary permit for a structure that we'd like to be permanent. All permits are temporary. They're 3 years long. You can extend them to 6 years. There's no mechanism to extend them beyond 6 years. So a permit itself is always temporary. That's not what we were talking about at the beginning here. That's not what DEP permitted. That's not what you were asked to permit. That's not what the evidence that came in here was relevant to. And that's not what what the commission should be doing here is permitting a structure, not permitting a permit. So I think the commission needs to keep its eye on what's actually before it, which was after you get an emergency permit to protect public health and safety because it's an emergency, you have to go back and file a notice of intent to regularize the project, put on orders of conditions, and look at it. There is no way that this project could be permitted under the existing state regulations. The state regulations don't protect roadways and infrastructure. You can go back. I've cited, we've talked about this before, 310 CMR 1030. It protects buildings, pre-1978 buildings. And the town tried to get around that originally by filing as a limited project, saying that this was maintenance of the roadway. And DEP back in December nixed that as an avenue. And so that's been removed from it. So you have to go back to the straight regulations, which protect buildings, but nothing else. The local bylaw is kind of interesting, because I went and looked at it, and we've always talked about it protecting buildings, pre-78 buildings too. But there's been a little moving around with the definitions in the local bylaw to say that, it doesn't just protect buildings, it also protects structures. And then you look at what is defined as a structure under the bylaw, and it essentially includes all of the accoutrements that people want to put on their beachfront houses, such as swimming pools and tennis courts and walkways and parking lots and et cetera, et cetera. I don't believe that's legal. I stated here in the paper, We can make that case elsewhere, obviously, if we have to on an appeal. Local bylaws are allowed to have stricter regulations than the State Act. They're not allowed to try to water down the State Act. The State Act says we'll protect buildings from pre-78. And then along comes Nantucket and says, well, we'll protect buildings, but you know what? We're going to protect swimming pools, and we're going to protect tennis courts, we're going to protect all this other stuff. Well, that waters down the Act. And so this provision in our regulations is actually not legal. Nevertheless, the focus has been on the public infrastructure aspect of it, which again is a watering down because the state doesn't provide for public infrastructure protection. But interestingly, that's only on coastal banks. And this thing is actually being built on a coastal beach below the bank, and then it's sort of resting up against the bank. Coastal beaches have no provision. The regulations under local bylaw for coastal beaches have no provision for protecting public infrastructure. So in order to get this thing built, one has to get around those two problems. Now, impacts. I did want to address impacts because it's quite clear from evidence, and I do want to point out that I've cited Jim O'Connell and I've cited Dr. Michael Bruno in here. Jim O'Connell's statements were made, I believe, to the larger geotextile project. Dr. Bruno's statements may have been made to the rock revetment project. In either case, there's references to both of them as being included in the record for this matter. So, and frankly, it's really confusing because when you look at the website, which is sort of our source for where we can get to all the documents, they're not listed by date, they're listed by sort of alphabetical order of something. And you have to pick your way through, and then you don't know, and because these hearings were being run simultaneously at one point, you don't know whether something went to one, you know, when it addressed your commission, you don't know what it goes to. And some of the stuff was incorporated by reference or by actually inclusion by being submitted to you guys. Interestingly, that's a problem for you because you're going to have to make sure that the record supports whatever order you issue. And if the stuff is missing from this record, you know, obviously that's a bureaucratic hassle kind of problem, because I presume you guys know sort of where you want to go with these things. But Dr. Bruno and Jim O'Connell both talked about downshore impacts, sediment transport. We were told we were going to be provided with sediment transport information. I asked for it. The commission asked for it. We were told it was going to be supplied to us, and then it never was. Dr. Bruno actually I think, summed up the SBPF/town's position, which is it's really too complicated anyway. But that doesn't really get you off the hook because the bylaw and the state act, when they're not protecting pre-78 houses, and even sometimes when they are, they say you can have no adverse impact on downdrift beaches, downdrift barrier beaches, downdrift dunes, downdrift vertebrate habitat. And in order to issue a permit, you will need to make a finding that there is no adverse impact to downdrift beaches. There is no adverse impact to downdrift barrier beaches at Sackatchew Pond. And in order to make that finding, you need the evidence in the record on which to base it. And I can't find that. I do find lots of evidence that there is an impact, but not that there isn't. So looking at the impacts that it's going to have and how that violates both the state and local acts and bylaws and regulations, I think the commission's, the only way you could grant this would be to give a waiver, to grant a waiver from the regulations. You can't grant a waiver from the state regs, but their argument is, sort of the state already did it. But I don't think that what the state did in the emergency permit binds the permit that's issued as a regular permit afterwards. I think that if you're going to give, I don't know how you get around the problem that the state act doesn't allow what's been constructed there under the act. other than to say it's been issued temporarily under an emergency permit to protect public health and safety, but it doesn't comply with the regulations and will have to be removed when the road is relocated and the emergency is abated. There's a number of findings that the Commission would have to do. I mean, there's a ton of findings you guys are going to have to make. But I just sort of wanted to focus on the ones that I thought were more interesting. I think the Commission will have to find that the project, as proposed and permitted, will have a negative impact on downdrift beaches. You're essentially stopping the coastal bank from providing sediment to downdrift beaches. So you have to make a finding that it does that, because that's what it's proposed to do. That's why they're building it. They're building it so their bank will no longer provide sediment to the beach. Now, they want to make up for that by doing the mitigation. But you get to that through a waiver. You don't get to that by fudging the findings and saying that it in fact isn't happening. I don't believe that you have the evidence for a sustainable long-term plan for mitigation that would work. We've heard various, the problem with this project is it's represented before you. It's also represented before the Board of Selectmen. It's also represented by SVPF principals and others in the Inquirer and Mirror and the Cape Cod Times and everywhere else. And so you read that, in fact, the plan is not for SVPF to pay for mitigation forever, but for it to be transferred over to the town at some point. And I don't think this commission ever got a really good grasp on how you guys can be assured that the mitigation will go on forever and ever and ever. You can look at the bullets. I'm not trying to read what I submitted in paper. But in the end, at the bottom of the page, it says, the Commission finds that the provision of sand mitigation will ameliorate but not eliminate the negative impacts caused by removing the natural bank as a sediment source. The Commission will allow this temporary harm to the natural system for the short period necessary and as required by the town to relocate Baxter Road.
I've got 3 pages of them all.
I have 4 pages. If you're missing one, I'd love to.
There is no support at one.
Anybody else miss a page? Mike's last page, the printer didn't print more than halfway down. So under the local bylaw, which allows for the granting of waivers, I think the only way the Commission is going to be able to grant this is by granting a waiver. And this is a problem, as I get to on the last page, because we've talked about precedents here, or I should say, SVPF of the town have talked about precedents, and they've said, well, we want to put up this geotube thing, but it isn't really a precedent. How do we know, somebody says, how do we know they're not going to build them all over the place? It's not a precedent. It's not a precedent. Well, that's only half true. There's 2 kinds of precedents. First of all, it is a precedent in the sense that the Commission will be arbitrary and capricious if you allowed one party to put in a geotube and a similarly situated party, somebody else, the exact same situation, proposing the exact same project, and you said they couldn't do it. So there's that kind of precedent. And in fact, that exists, although the reason people will say there's no such thing as precedent is because, well, you can always try to find some little difference between each project and each proposal, and you can hang a denial on that little difference. But there's another kind of precedence, which is procedural precedence, which requires that party A have to come in and file a permit and, for instance, submit plans with a stamp on them, and submit all the other stuff that we require at the Conservation Commission as part of our procedures. And you can't just say, okay, this person has to comply with those procedural regulations, but this person doesn't. They can get a permit without going through all the hoops. And it's really troubling when the party getting the special treatment is the town of Nantucket, because it starts to stink to other people who sort of observing the process from the outside. And so I specifically was trying to look at, several of the things that I thought were procedural irregularities. I've mentioned some of them previously. such as other parties have to pay for an independent review, and here we didn't even have independent review. The waiver request is interesting. We require written waivers. We require written waivers that are specific to what's being waived, which regulation, what part of what regulation is being waived, why the waiver is justified, and it has to be lot specific. At least it used to be. If you had a project that spans several lots, you could grant a waiver on one lot, but not on the other. Here, we have not gotten a waiver request in writing for the relevant and necessary waiver, which is the waiver for stopping the bank from providing sediment to downdrift beaches. What we had instead was, and I put it in quotes, so this is on in their writing, it says, any other waiver the commission deems appropriate. Well, that's sort of a procedural precedent issue there. If you're going to let the town of Nantucket come in and not say what waivers they want, but just sort of say, well, just give us whatever waivers you think we need, then you need to let everybody else who practices before the commission to come in and say, just give us whatever waivers you think we need. So I think that's sort of a flaw with the whole submission, despite the fact that there's like a foot worth of paperwork that's been submitted. The waiver requests were never in there. The other thing I think the commission is going to have to look at, and this is a precedent-setting thing, is allowing coastal engineering structures so far removed from the bank as to be to protect structures. I think I garbled that. To protect structures so far removed from the bank as to be outside the commission's jurisdiction. We're talking now, or SVPF and the town are talking that they're trying to protect buildings that are on the other side of Baxter Road, and some of them are more than 100 feet away. So what's the standard going to be? 100 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet? You start setting down a number and allowing the town to do it or SVPF to do it. That's the same standard that's going to start applying to everyone else. And the other thing is the applicants represent that there's an imminent threat, and I don't think that we have a grasp on what the imminent threat is. I know that sort of went into the emergency calculation, but it's also going into the discussion on why this is necessary as a continuing, I think we heard the expression a continuing emergency mentioned at one point. This bank is far away from the road in most places. It's somewhat close to the road along that little stretch where they put the bank. We were presented with a number, which was the town has found, and I think it was because the Board of Selectmen voted on it, the town has found that once the road is 25 feet, it's dangerous, and the road's considered no longer usable. Well,
Ian, you might want to mute your phone. You were getting a lot of feedback. Sorry.
Sorry?
Is there a way that you can hear us, and I had to use this quite a bit in the airport, and mute your phone? Because we're getting a lot of scritchy noises and feedback, and it's a little hard to hear.
Well, it's like, I don't know what to do. I could put it on mute, see how that works.
And you can still hear us? Yeah, give it a try. Sorry, Dirk, I didn't mean to.
I already did. Did it make a difference?
Yeah?
Well, it's better right now.
It's better right
yes.
now. It sounded like you were vacuuming up shells through a harmonica.
I was actually getting a breadboard out of the dishwasher to have a little snack while listening.
Oh, rub it in. Have a drink as well.
When we hear luau music, you're done. Okay, I'm sorry.
Anyway, I think the commission is going to have to address what's an imminent threat. How far away is a threat when it's to be seriously imminent? And then one final point, because I was spending my couple days reading through all of the stuff that's been put into this record. Sconset Beach Preservation Fund / the town, in its 2013 Notice of Intent, and it is included in this because Deanne Atherton took it out of that one and made sure it got put in this one. It's part of the record. It says, replacement of the geotubes will be expected to be required on a frequent basis, one or more times annually, is what they represented. And the commission has received no protocols. Nobody's even discussed with the commission how one would go about replacing geotubes on an annual or semi-annual basis. And I think, whether they're not interested in presenting more information, I guess you guys can come up with how you want to deal with that. My guess is if it needs replacement, it's a project failure. because the damage of pulling those things out and replacing them would be so great, it would actually cause actual harm to the bank as it exists at the point when they fail. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to give you any more helpful advice or questions, but if not, I'll go sit down.
Thanks, Dirk. Yeah, Ms. McKinnon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily McKinnon for the Nantucket Land Council. We have previously submitted quite a bit of technical review information, primarily from Applied Coastal Research and Engineering, and that's in the file from the last several months of the public hearing. I have one final letter that I'll pass around to you tonight, and it really isn't anything new. It's essentially a list of the state and local performance standards that we don't believe have been met by the proposed project. I don't want to reiterate too much of what Dirk just said and represented, but the coastal engineering structure, the geotubes, when they were permitted by DEP under the emergency certification process, were obviously done so based on the emergency certification requirements in the regulations, just as you guys permitted them under the emergency certification requirements in the local bylaw. And DEP, as well as you, were very clear with the fact that at some later point you would have to review the project under those regulations, which is what you've been doing for the last couple of months now. We don't feel that the project does meet the performance standards, many of them under the state act and the local bylaw, as is outlined in this letter. And as Dirk mentioned, feel that a number of them would require waivers in order for a permit to be issued. And based on what has been presented, we don't think there's a way to make a determination that there's going to be no adverse impacts from this project on downdrift and adjacent resource areas. Another concern is that I certainly don't believe that the removal of these geotubes is going to be as easy and painless as is proposed, and I think that the longer that they're in there, the more complicated that will become as these tubes move, if they become more brittle. And so I hope that as you begin your deliberations of this project and do review all of these performance standards carefully, that you'll also see that they have not been met and that this project can't be permitted by the state and local wetland protection regulations. So I'm going to hand this letter around so that you have it to review in your file. Again, it's really nothing new, but it is a list of performance standards that I hope you will review carefully as you proceed with your deliberations. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
Catherine Stover, 5 Liberty Street. The list of items that might slip by that Dirk presented is, I mean, I'm just amazed at some of the things that he's brought up. And the lad is wicked smart, and he's way smarter than I. So I'm thinking that if it's possible, if he'd be willing to share that bulleted list, that some of us that are trying to keep abreast of what's going on, to keep track, it would be really, really helpful. I'm sure you guys already have that, but great. Thank you.
Well, Dirk presented us with a handout that I think we'll get on the website.
No, I'll try to get them up. I'll go back in tonight and try to get them up.
Thank you so much. This is
Okay.
great.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Catherine. Anything else from the public? Yeah, Deanne.
Mr. Chairman, Deanne Atherton. I just have a few quick points, and I only have one hard copy and will submit an electronic version of this to the administrator so that it can be available for everyone. My first point is just as a point of clarification, I think that we need to remind ourselves, or maybe I do, that this is not a pilot project, that the proposal, that the subject of this notice of intent is not a small project, but according to one of the co-applicants, it's the first phase of a much longer hard armoring structure that will run from the lighthouse south to Mid-Baxter Road. And I would like to submit for the record an email sent by Mr. Posner and Mr. Weimar in February, addressed to dear Nantucketers, which outlines the plans to expand this hard armoring. So while I know every application before you is discrete and you have to look at it as a standalone proposal, I don't know if this is usual that one of the applicants is already out in the community talking about how it will be expanded before it's even been permitted. My second point is that the town has adopted an emergency plan should a real emergency occur in the area of Northern Baxter Road. And I have a copy of that plan. It is a one-page memorandum to the town manager from the emergency manager coordinator and the DPW head called, and it's titled The Emergency Monitoring of Baxter Road, and it's dated November 19th, 2013. And it just seems to me as a layperson, given the environmental damage already demonstrated during the construction of the geotextile hard armoring structure, it is evident that implementing this emergency plan, which is outlined in a one-page memorandum, would have far less adverse impacts and therefore should be considered a preferable alternative to dealing with any emergency should it arise. And I have a copy of that for the record. It is among the documents. I get a little confused whether it's in the record for this NOI or not.
Has the Board of Selectmen withdrawn, are they withdrawing their application?
Withdrawing their application.
You're saying the town has an emergency plan in place instead of this application?
I don't know if it's instead of, but perhaps it's in addition to, Mr. Glowacki. And I think in that case, if there's a second emergency plan, and as I read it, and I ask you to read it carefully, it seems to me it's an emergency plan for a real emergency. My third point is that, and Mr. Rogovin referred to this, but in the words of one of the co-applicants, SVPF, quote, geotextile tubes are not well suited to a high-energy environment like Sconset. And as you know, this was contained in the alternative analysis in the NOI for the rock revetment, which was submitted dated July 2nd, 2013, which is before you in an NOI which is currently being continued. The paragraph is an analysis of why geotextile tubes will not work at this site. Such statements undermine any assertion that geotextile tubes are a preferable alternative, and ironically, they are in words of the co-applicant SVPF themselves. Fourth, I'd like to remind you that the Commission has already found, by a formal vote of 4-3, taken on November 20th, 2013, within the public hearing of this NOI, that there are, in fact, reasonable alternatives to geotextile tubes. I have searched for the minutes of the November 20th meeting, and they apparently are in draft form, and they're not available to the public, so that they are not posted. So I had to rely on a summary provided by Peter B. Brace, who is an environmental writer and reporter who has been attending the hearings and writing summaries for the proceedings for the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. And according to Mr. Brace's summary of the November 20th Conservation Commission meeting, quote, finally, Commissioner Glowacki made a motion that there was no reasonable alternative to the geotubes, which Commissioner Andy Bennett seconded. But the vote didn't go their way, with Commissioners Bennett, Glowacki, and Ian Golding voting yes, and Commissioners Leslie Johnson and Sarah Oaktie via cell phone while traveling by train, Jen Carberg and CONCOM Chairman Ernie Steinauer voting no. This is part of the record in this notice of intent. And my final point, which I reiterate one more time is ask you to please seriously consider the adverse impacts to the public beach. Expert written testimony has been submitted on the record of this NOI by Dr. Robert Young in a letter dated November 3rd, 2013, that says in part, quote, when placed on an eroding or retreating beach or bluff, geotubes will cause that beach to narrow and eventually disappear, end of quote. There has been no evidence submitted to you to refute this assertion. There has been no evidence submitted to you from the applicants about how they intend to mitigate this impact. Without mitigation and the assurance of some amount of dry beach in front of the seawall, the ability of the public to recreate on their own beach is severely curtailed, if not obstructed. Going up and over a 20-plus foot geotube seawall, supposedly covered with excavated sediment, should not be an acceptable alternative. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just would like everybody to know that the minutes are now posted to the website. Sorry about that. I think they got lost when we switched to the new site. But the drafts are up from November and I believe December are all on the website now. They have not been approved, so they are only the draft minutes. Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment? Yeah, Sharon.
Well, I'm just going to ask flat out that you deny the application, that you deny the approval or whatever you call it. Anyway, the pictures we submitted last time that somebody was supposed to comment on and didn't, but I would like to comment on, they're part of the record. They show that the bank is still eroding at the top, and it's significant erosion from the top, and it is above the area that they're suggesting that they're going to plant in. So that area is going to continue to erode. The point number two is that the project is harmful or they wouldn't have to mitigate. If you only mitigate something that's harmful. If it's not harmful, you wouldn't need mitigation. So if it's harmful and we only consider this project, if you say, okay, I'm only going to consider this project, not whether they're going to expand or not the rock revetment, just this project, why would the applicant want to continue to mitigate something and spend all that millions of dollars pouring sand over the bluff when the project is already failing? It just doesn't make sense. It's just a common sense thing to me that why would you continue to pay for mitigation on something that's not working itself? So there's obviously some other purpose to this. I don't know what it is. The third point I want to make, and this is kind of an incomplete thing, but it's only because I just got this yesterday, and I'm just going to submit it to you to look at. It's a question that we have asked the chairman of the Board of Selectmen to look into. The 40-foot allegation that Philip Weinberg made, he said that because the bluff had eroded 40 feet at Bluff House in 1 year, is the reason for this one of the main reasons that this was approved. And we asked for the data to prove that 40-foot loss because the pictures we have that are taken, the untouched pictures that we have taken at Bluff House over a 16-month period don't show anywhere close to 40 feet. So we wanted to know where the data is. And so this was given to me yesterday, and I'm sorry that it's not, I don't have any more completion, but since they're talking about closing public comments, I've heard that you might do that. I want to get it in. And this is from the town website. It's a memorandum from Josh Posner, from Maria Hartnett and Les Smith of Epsilon on the emergency status for homes and public infrastructure along Baxter Road. And the map that they have on here is the same map twice. It's just the same map that somebody has drawn a line along. And they say that's the 2012 deal, and it's the same map from 2013 on both sides. There's no map from 2012 for you to physically look at the difference and see where it is. And also in this same document, they claim that two pre-1978 homes are in danger. One is at 97, which is swept away. The other 93, which is swept away. The other 97, which is Bluff Edge. Well, Bluff Edge was completely removed in 2010, and this structure that's there now was brought back out there. Now, I don't know if that makes any difference or not. I'm just saying that because if the public comments are going to close, I'd like to get that out there. That house was completely removed, the lot sat empty, and this thing was brought back to it. I don't even know if it's part of the original Bluff Edge or not. That was at 97. Anyway, thank you, and I'll give you this that was given. Sure. I'm sorry I don't have other copies.
Sharon, before you step down, I have a question for you, since you and Dirk have probably spent more time on that beach than anybody, and you've taken many, many photographs of that area. I just wonder what your opinion is of this project's impact on wetland scenic views.
Well, it's just horrible. I mean, what do you have now? You have a big pile of dirt out there. When you're on the beach, the thing is over your head. It's way over your head. This is your scene now that when you go out there. It's not only doing that, it's destroyed the face of the bluff. And I know a lot of people don't see the beauty in that, but it is very beautiful. You're going to cover this up with the grass, which would be great if that was any capable of sticking. But that grass is not going to stay on there. If you go down south of 67, where they put grass, it's on there for a little while, and then it all drops down. It doesn't stay. The bluff is just too vertical at this point. I'm not a landscaper. Mr. Glauke can speak to that, but I don't know how you get grass to stay on something straight up and down with the kind of weather we have. It's ruined the beach completely as far as any scenic view. There's no getting around that. It's ugly now. If it goes past the lighthouse, I'm going to tell you, you're going to have a redhead duct tape down there because that part is incredibly beautiful, and that's where Andrew McKenna of Mariah Mitchell has gone out there and done archaeology digs and dug out 125,000-year-old fossils. This is a geological wonderland to me. That it's the only thing we have like it on Nantucket. There's nothing else. And you destroy it, you've lost it. We won't have it anymore. Does that answer?
Yeah, I thought an artist would be a good person to comment on the views.
It is. It's sad to me that it's not appreciated by the people who have it. Although we have heard from some people on the bluff who do. We've heard from people on Baxter Road.
Thank you. Mr. Lafarge, and BAM is recused from this hearing.
Ian, are you still with us? Making sure you can. That's a bad
I
thing.
am indeed, but I was mute.
That's awesome. I just wanted to
Thanks,
check.
Brad.
Yeah, it's much quieter, and I'm glad you can hear.
Hi, Bam Lafarge, and I'm speaking as a member of the public. I don't know how many people attended this lecture last night by Rob Young, a coastal geologist from North Carolina, but he talked about beaches up and down the coast. He doesn't have an axe to grind. One thing that he said, which really is something you guys all know, but I want everybody to remember, he said that there aren't very many natural beaches left on the East Coast. And where, the things that grow and live there that feed other things aren't there anymore. It looks like a beach to a beachgoer, but to animals or critters that live on the beach, it isn't there anymore. So, to me, that's a real reason, not to necessarily deny this, but to remember in the future about if anything else comes up to armor stuff, because you take that away when you overnourish stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Anyone else? Just a minute, Steve. You're not a public hearing. Catherine?
Catherine Stover, 5 Liberty Street. I just have an additional question. I don't know whether it's ever been answered, but how much have the trucks going over the road for replenishment of the sand, and how much of the watering that people do for their lawns, how much effect has that had on the erosion of the bluff and at the top, and also making it, undermining the sand that's there on the bluff.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Auger.
Just another quick comment, and you reminded me of it. It was something I'd thought about some months ago, and I'm not trying to be flippant, because the wetland scenic view is an interest in our bylaw that's protected, and I know that the applicant, specifically Mr. Cohen, has addressed that on their behalf on the theory that the eroding bank is sort of ugly looking, and that if you make it neat and put sand on it and plants and everything, it will look prettier. And obviously these are aesthetic views that people are going to have different opinions about. However, I did recall a couple months ago the World War II era song about bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. It's a song that many people are aware of. The White Cliffs of Dover are.
You gonna sing that now?
I can't sing. Otherwise, I'd be happy to do that. But just postcards of the Cliffs of Dover. There's actually postcards of Gay Head on Martha's Vineyard, Sankaty Head here. The headlands aren't an eyesore. They're actually beautiful. It's a natural process. And if you look at the definition of what wetland scenic views are or the standards within our regulations, it talks about looking at the natural landscapes and how natural things interpose with each other. This isn't a case of something necessarily blocking off a wetland scenic view, although there is a case to be made. It's blocking off the view of the bank if you're down on the beach. But it is, in many ways, destroying a wetland view, a wetland scenic view. And I don't think anybody's ever going to write a song about bluebirds over the geotubes of Dover. So I think that would be another reason to deny this, although perhaps not the only reason.
Okay, if there's no other questions or comments from the public, anything else from the commission?
I did go to that forum last night, and it was really helpful. I don't know if other people did. One thing that Dr. Young confirmed is that he's monitored hundreds of, in fact, he monitors all coastal erosion structures in the United States. And there, he runs a huge database at Western Carolina University that documents what's occurring at each of these sites, which is really helpful. And he encouraged us to pay attention to the ones in Massachusetts. But in his findings for beaches that have geotextile tubes, that the invertebrates that live on the beach in front of that, in areas where either there's tubes in place or over excess beach nourishment, that you do end up killing the invertebrates on the beach. They recruit, but then they get killed down again. They recruit, they get killed down again. And I thought that was, there's a lot of good information. My quick question actually was for Kara. I just want to be clear for myself, where is the town at as far as moving the road, providing access? What is right today, your all's plans?
As a matter of fact, Andrew just sent an email today, and he is working on getting the easements finalized from the Sankaty Golf Course for a new roadway that ends in a cul-de-sac at the private road that comes off of Baxter Road.
Bayberry or
I'm sorry?
The paper road or Bayberry or?
Paper road. It's a paper road. And Silvio and I met with Art Gasparo about the grading that was going to be necessary to access that. Until we finish the legal documentation, we won't be searching for the money to have that constructed. We don't have those funds yet. We would have to go to the next town meeting to get those authorized.
And do you have a timeline, do you think, or what you're hoping to have the easements obtained? I know it's hard.
Could you ask Connor to get closer to the microphone, please?
Oh, yeah, get a little closer to the microphone.
Okay,
Did
sorry.
you hear that last bit?
Sorry.
Okay.
No, I really didn't.
We're working on, or Andrew is working on getting the easements from the Sankaty Golf Course for our new roadway to come along their property line up to a paper road that is existing off of Baxter Road. I'd hesitate to say how long that's going to take because it has to go through the proper channels.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a question as well. prior to a meeting 2 weeks ago, Wisconsin Beach and the town submitted a letter from Ocean and Coastal Consultants dated April 5th, 2014, Coastal Analysis Summary at Sconset, it's titled. And it discusses, mainly it's focused on the wave climate at the site and the possibility of conditions that are within the realm of the 100-year storm occurring. And even though a 100-year storm by definition has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year, this letter makes the case, and I think in an attempt to support the fourth geotube, which was then withdrawn, so this never came up, that the likelihood of such an event are actually much higher, and they actually state that they're likely to occur sometime within the 5-year planned life of this project. And if we're to take this letter at face value, that we're likely to see conditions similar to a 100-year storm in 5 years, then I think, given the testimony we've heard with this project and in previous submissions, the importance of having mitigation in place, we're going to have nowhere near sufficient mitigation in place to protect the interests of the downdrift property owners. We would need a 100-year storm. I mean, I think we're talking about the fear factor that we were presented at the beginning of this, of losing 30 foot of bank. 30 foot of bank. If we're going to lose 30 foot of bank instead of the 2.8 foot average, we're going to need 10 times the mitigation on the beach. And I don't think you can put 10 times the mitigation on the beach. So I don't know how we're going to rectify this problem of the probability by your own testimony of very severe conditions and the fact that you only want to mitigate for an average year of 2.8 feet of bank loss. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Cohen.
Mr. Chairman, a lot of the comments that were presented by members of the audience are either factually incorrect, legally incorrect, or taken out of context in a way to present them to you in a way that I do not think is the correct way for you to be interpreting them here. However, I'm going to spare us all the next hour of going through them one by one and suggest that the record stands for itself, and should the Commission decide to move forward, that it has the information to do that, that there is a basis for making the necessary findings and for granting the necessary waivers, and for all of the plans and all of the information you need is in front of you. If you have any specific questions or concerns, I'm happy to address them to the extent. I'm not sure if that last comment was a question or not. I'm happy to address it, but it sounded more like a comment than a question. I think the record stands for itself, and I'm happy to not address all of the points that were made, although if there are any of them that you'd like me to address, I'm also happy to address any specific ones that you think might be important.
Anybody have any questions for Steve or Kara? Okay. Anything else from the public? This might be your last chance here.
Looks like not.
Okay. Well, what would you folks like to do?
Could we ask to get a sense of the Commission? I know that it would be preferable to have the hearing remain open to discuss topics for the order of conditions.
Well, I don't know. I think if there's no further testimony, then
We should close.
then the normal course of events would be to ask to close.
Okay.
And then we'll decide what. Steve, you agree? You're ready to close? Jeff, do we have everything we need to close if it gets to this?
I would say if you're comfortable with the record that's there and there's no outstanding issues, or you feel that the information provided both by the applicant or members of the public are enough to craft your findings for a positive or negative order, then you guys have enough. But I would caution you in the sense of, if you have questions or specific issues that you don't feel have been addressed fully, or thoughts that you have, to bring those up now before the public hearing closes, because once it closes, we can't take in additional information. And if you think there may be something in the course of our deliberation and going through performance standards and going through, possible waivers and going through conditioning, if there's a question that you're not comfortable with yet, then I'd say you still need to take in information to satisfy that concern. I don't want to get into a situation again where during deliberation something comes up that hasn't been addressed. It very well may, but I want you guys to all be comfortable with the level of information you have to base your decision on.
I think the questions that we've asked over the last 5 or 6 months, I mean, not all of them were answered, but I think SBPF attempted to answer it, and then on ones that they felt they couldn't answer, like the sediment transport one, which is an important one. I think they were very clear in all of their presentations that they felt they didn't have the information available to answer that. That doesn't mean we can't take that into account, but...
Correct. I mean, I guess through the course of your deliberation and kind of where we're going to end up is after the public hearing closes, is you guys are going to have to conduct your analysis of the merits of the project against the performance standards, discuss that amongst the group, and then decide if the information you've been provided is enough to condition a positive order, or if it's grounds for denial on a negative order. I mean, that's, you really, as much as I hate to say it.
The material that's been submitted this evening by Dirk and Emily and et cetera, that's on the record now.
Correct.
So
and I guess I would say is you guys probably still have the hard part of your job really left to do.
I guess what I would suggest is, if the commission closes the hearing, which we are comfortable, the SBPF is comfortable doing and the town is comfortable doing, then that would be fine. When we move to the order of conditions section, normally that's a discussion you have amongst yourselves, but if you have any questions that you feel that you want to ask of the applicant or let anybody participate in, that is something that you occasionally do, although you obviously don't take new information, but you might ask us
we ask for
clarification or where was this information or those kind of things. And so instead of refuting all these points with information that's already been provided, I'd rather wait and see if we get to that point where you may or may not want us to point out where that was addressed and let you make your decision that way. I don't think that any of my responses to their points would be using new information.
Okay. Well, Deanne?
Just a point of information on that. If there are communications between the applicant and any members of the commission or the administrator after the public hearing is closed, are they a matter of public record?
They should be made in a meeting.
I mean, they're on the tape, and we don't stop the tape.
But in the instance that Attorney Cohn just referenced, if they're supplying any comments or assistance with the drafting of the order of conditions, that would be in writing and it would be available to the public?
In this case, we're talking about when we deliberate. Sometimes we ask for clarification, like, do you think you're be willing to plant a garden instead of a... And so it's in public.
Right. That would be in public, and anything we would submit would be I can't submit anything to the public record, but if there's any request from the town, or from the the commission for anything, it would be part of the record.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I'm a bit confused. Have we got a formal request to close?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a motion to close? Is everybody, first of all, ready to close?
Can you hear us, Ian?
I can. So moved.
Okay.
Wow. Do I have a second? Okay, so I have to do a roll call vote.
Okay.
Yes.
So the motion to close the public hearing, Ian?
Yes.
Commissioner Jen?
Yes.
Sarah?
Aye.
Ernie? Aye. Andy?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye, 5 o'clock.
Wow, okay, that motion carries with Commissioner Lafarge recused or sitting this one out. Okay, well,
right.
thanks, everybody.
But before, I know everyone's anxious to leave. I know typically our practice is to take up the discussion of closed hearings. If you look at agenda item number 10 under orders, I know this is a pretty substantive deliberation that's probably coming. I would present a couple of different options. Option A is maybe with members of the public and interested parties here instead of waiting through the entire meeting. We could do it now. We could certainly schedule a special hearing for another time just to take up that matter and this deliberation completely. I think if we take
maybe not a bad idea.
if we take that if we
Yeah.
take that option, we'll definitely arrange for a representative from town council to come down to aid in that deliberation to go through that. We have 21 days to issue, so we can certainly meet any number of times in between now and then, as long as they're properly posted public meetings, which we can definitely take care of. It would also give you a chance to review the new material that came in if we choose that route.
Maybe next Wednesday.
Yeah, how about next Wednesday?
Really, the option is yours.
It works for me. I think having a separate hearing so that everyone feels like they've got plenty of time to discuss
Yeah, we're
it.
fresh.
Review
and,
everything.
And we don't keep a room full of people waiting and
For
any.
their hearings
Yeah.
and stuff, so. So we go next Wednesday at 4 o'clock?
Ian, does,
Ian?
I'm not sure that I will be able to do it, which, obviously that worries me. I don't know if I'm going to have, I'll have to, I'm sorry, I'm mumbling. Yes, I'll make a point of being available. I wish I brought more of my notes with me. My mistake.
I'm pretty sure I can make it.
I can do next Wednesday, but I will have to leave at 6.
That's fine. That's if we go from 4 to 6. That's 2 hours of deliberation. That's probably pretty.
Yeah, I probably should do that.
That's probably pretty solid enough to.
Putting it out there.
Does that work for?
Does that work for Kira and Steve?
Yes. And you're going to request town council?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Bam? Or you want, doesn't matter, but if you want.
No.
Not that you don't matter, but.
All right. So
It would
so
be good to have you sit in on it if you can.
we'll schedule that, and I'll figure out which room we'll be in. My guess is I know the Board of Selectmen are down here next week, so I'll try to arrange it for the second floor room for the training room.
Is that the 21st?
Yep.
Yes, but I will definitely get that posted well in advance. I'll try to post that in the next 24 hours or so, just so that room location is clear.
Okay, thanks, everybody. This was,
Yeah.
I
Thank you
appreciate
to the
everybody's civil behavior, and
I'd like to thank the commission and all the participants. This has been, a lot of effort by a lot of people, a lot of time. Thank you.
thanks, Steve. Thanks, Kara. Okay. You staying with us, Ian?
I am.
Okay, great.
He's got a Mai Tai going right now.
Yeah. He's probably sitting out at the
A
pool.
little early in the day. It's only 11.
Oh, but it's vacation.
Okay, so that, I'll
And
give it
I did review the parts of the meeting I missed. I think you closed a lot of those, but I think I can still sit in on pretty much everything. Take me a second to. What is that for? Oh, that, yes, thank you. Brain.
Does the big microphone stretch over? Because that might, I guess we can turn one of ours on.
Radio Southpaw. There's more left in the building than we're used to, because I ain't.
There you go.
You weren't present.
Get one of those for our
That
upstairs
does it.
meetings.
Right. I know.
Yeah, we really do
We
need
really
to.
should.
Okay, we ready to move on?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to the actual packet now.
Okay, so that takes us to Mass Department of Transportation, 4 Goose Pond Lane.
All right, just real quickly.
So Pete, you done recording, eh? Thanks.
This one was continued, Mr. Chairman, last time. There was a question about written waiver request. which has come in and was included in your packet.
There was a very interesting letter from Mass DOT, too, that I wanted to ask about, because that's probably something town council should weigh in on.
Yeah, I would like to hear something. from
Yeah,
town council,
it's a
too.
nice assertion, but I...
And then we also were waiting, we had mistakenly misplaced the determination from Mass Natural Heritage, which has also come in of a determination of no taken, no effect under their regulations. And I'll turn it over to Mike. Those are the two real outstanding issues that we had.
Not too much more to add on the project other than the comments that already have been made. The waiver's been submitted. I believe at this point there's no other comment. What we request is the closure of the public hearing and the approval of the draft order of conditions.
Well, let's just see if anybody's got any more questions or.
I had a curiosity. I heard that I don't know if that really concerns us, but I heard that the HDC was really pushing for wider banks on the side instead of the steel.
The steel sheeting that's proposed as part of this project was recommended because it would prevent the filling of wetland.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't really speak much more beyond that other than we thought it was more critical to avoid filling of wetland, which would have triggered federal permitting as well. And so that this was the solution was taken. They did submit a comment letter to Mass DOT regarding the concerns, and Mass DOT has instructed the designer, VHP, to minimize and found opportunities to reduce the amount of steel sheeting that would be used and the split rail fencing as well. So that's trying to be addressed, and we are looking at other pavement options, if I can say that, just for the color. That's not really this group's concern, but just as an FYI, that's something that they're evaluating as well.
Actually, on the pavement options, I'm really keenly, because there's a big difference between cold-rolled asphalt, hot-rolled asphalt, pavers, bricks, crushed gravel, and I wasn't quite clear on where you guys, as far as material for the path, where you were at right now.
It's the hot mix super pave is what it's called. It's what's being recommended. Now there's an additive to that, as I mentioned, for the color concerns, but the super pave is what's being recommended.
Has there been any attempt to look at percolation either in from the top through the path, or I think one of the big concerns we had was if water is actually fluxing through that berm or not?
I think that was the question that was asked at the last meeting and was addressed by the senior environmental engineer at VHB, that there really would be a trivial amount of horizontal movement of water through the berm, and that effectively the steel sheeting had a minimum effect to whatever percolation was happening through the berm.
Or has that been measured?
There was boring samples and soil samples taken today that'll be used to verify that assertion.
That should be in the record, though.
Yeah, we should get that.
We should have that.
We should have that.
Because that's a
presented
big
to us.
question, at least for me.
Yeah, that is a big question.
The question is what?
Go ahead.
What kind of water movement, if any, is going through
Through
that
the
berm?
berm. What's the
And if
percolation?
the steel sheeting is going to interrupt water flow between the upland wetlands and the creeks, or which would, could be mitigated by a improved culvert system, which is sort of planned for down the road, but
I'll just add in addition to my comment that those comments were addressed in the letter submitted by VHB. They did explain and did address that. I believe that the water table depth was something that probably wouldn't impact the flow of water, the depth of it. The sheeting wasn't going down very far, only about 6 feet. So I'll just add that as my comment to that.
Yeah, I thought we pretty much discussed that at the last time this was up, and we all talked about our observations at the site visit, where we saw what we saw, and the water flowing through the culvert, and the being higher on one side than on the other side.
But just because it's flowing through the culvert doesn't mean that there isn't some flow through that berm. And so I think what had happened at the last meeting was that a lot of statements were made that there was no water flow, but it was all speculation. And so some of the soil boring that was being done was going to help verify that. And he said they just took that soil boring today, and we don't actually have it yet. As far as the
standing, when we talked about it at our last meeting, we talked about the elevation being higher on one side than on the other. And
the elevation of the water.
Yes. The water being higher, the elevation of the top of the water. And it seemed pretty, it surprises me to hear this today, because it just seemed to me that what we were hearing there was that if there was appreciable flow through, that the water levels would be more nearly equal on either, would be more apt to be more nearly equal on either side.
Not necessarily, depending on recent rainfall events that had happened when we were out there. I mean, the back part, the freshwater side of that berm is obviously going to drain slower out than the salt marsh, which has a large area to drain out. So just because there's higher water on one side does not necessarily mean that it's not flowing through that bank. We just didn't know at what rate or if it was at all.
Right, but it was pouring through the culvert.
Which it's going to do because that's the path of least resistance.
I don't think that there was a study proposed to look at the amount of percolation that was happening horizontally. I think that was mentioned as data that was collected as part of the path itself, and related to other design issues, not necessarily for the Conservation Commission to evaluate, because that was a concern raised. I just rely on the letter that was submitted by VHB, if you still have that for your record, and just rely on those comments that were made in there to address that concern.
I don't think that anybody gets confusing a compacted railroad bed with a sieve.
No. But it's probably more permeable than an asphalt road. So there's a difference from both the amount of ability that it has to take rainwater and infiltrate it down versus now I think it's going to sheet off much faster because it's going to be impermeable, at least with the material you just mentioned. It's going to be more impermeable than the material that's there right now.
I believe that the shoulder would be more permeable than the surface that's there right now. I think there's
not
already
the shoulder. I mean, I'm talking about the riding surface, the surface of the path, not the shoulder.
Correct.
Oh, well, you got a 2-foot shoulder, right? And then
correct.
So we got to just make sure that that's enough, to absorb stuff coming off the top, and that there's
One
not.
of the alternatives, if it's not, is to fill more wetlands.
No, you could use different materials.
permeable.
You could use a permeable, like the pavers. There's different things that can actually absorb more water. So I think there's two
Or
concerns.
the bike path that's out on Eel Point.
Yeah.
You can have permeable surfaces that can still look like they're solid and don't have to be.
And that strollers and bikes can.
Permeable asphalt.
Yep.
Yeah, there's Belgian blocks, there's permeable asphalt, there's types of concrete that are more permeable.
It's
That's-
extremely common anytime you have something like this that's near
Or in.
a wetland, or in this case,
In a
literally in a wetland.
Yeah.
Then, it's something we brought up a couple times, and it was just kind of passed over as not being important without any data backing it up.
too much maintenance and things.
That was really the only issue, was too much maintenance, and it was more expensive.
Well, and you have different contributing chemicals from the different types of asphalt. That's why hot roll and cold roll are different in their constituencies, what kind of VOCs you get off of them, what kind of runoff. There's stuff in different types of asphalt that trickles off into the wetlands. So it's not the same thing as just the physical characteristics, it's also the chemical characteristics. They might be small, but the shoulder, what it's made up of, its ability to actually absorb those different types of chemicals is important. In a perfect world, I'd probably look at the makeup of the asphalt and the actual thing in that.
My son, who was just here, has used that bike path a lot, and he thinks it's just fine the way it is, and that the surface is good, stuff runs off it, and I actually none of this is really Concon stuff, but I just can't believe that it's being proposed like this without addressing the whole culvert thing. That I know in the harbor plan it was being worked on without without doing anything with that you're building this $1 million bike path to nowhere. And it surprised me that the culverts aren't getting rebuilt or at least re-engineered as part of this process. But that's kind of, I realize that's off the subject.
Not necessarily. I'll say that the culverts were part of the project initially up to the preliminary stages until the permitting requirements, and they needed to be treated separately, being that this is a bike path project and the culvert project is a bigger, I don't know if Jeff.
Yeah, I think I can comment on that a little bit. One of the big hang-ups with the culvert aspect of the project really relates to the availability of funding and permitting for the dredging of Goose Pond itself, and that's caused a significant slowdown. I know in kind of my follow-ups outside of the meeting with the project, I know the culverts have come up quite frequently. I just know that in the scheme of funding and funding availability, dealing with the dredging project and this project don't really match up right now for a number of reasons. Not that that's any great excuse or reasoning for it, but I know through kind of following up and discussing some of the questions that you guys had, that it was brought up, it's just not available right now to fund and to permit.
Has any engineering been done about what we'll end up with after dredging Goose Pond?
Yes.
More than one culvert? I mean, I'm ignorant, I realize.
Well, no, is the current design that was put together is for a single culvert. It's just resized, and it's more appropriately sized than the two pipes that are in there now. And it also was engineered to a different depth than the current culvert system that's there to deal with that flow and the flushing in and out of the pond and in and out of the marsh.
So the relevant point really is that at some point needs to be addressed.
Well, the other relevant point is once you drive that sheet steel into and around the current projects, do you have to redo this? I mean, this is more of a physical thing, but it's a double impact. If you have to go back and redo the sheet steel twice, because when they redo the culverts, how much of what
I'll just say that that's being incorporated into the design as an easy replacement of this. So
okay, so you'd be able to power it out or record it out?
there's a small section opening that's intended to be removed so that to accept the culvert in the future whenever that happens.
So you're designing. When at the beginning you didn't necessarily have that plan.
It just seems to me that really is the relevant point, and then it's the railroad guy screwing up the values and the interests that we protect, and the policy question of whether to have a bike path or not is not with this. Is not really what's in front of us here. And any difference in the hydrology over paving or unpaving or what kind of paving it is, I can't see it amounting more than a teaspoon relative to what the railroad bed itself is doing. I just wonder what we think we're doing here.
Okay, anything else from the commission or the public on the bike path? Yeah, Ms. McKinnon.
Sorry, remove your mic. You're going to have to take a longer walk now.
Keep her awake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily McKinnon for the Nantucket Land Council. More just a question for clarification. And I think that the bike path and the culvert project don't have to be done separately. It's just a matter of funding being available for one suddenly and not the other. That I think the town is trying to take advantage of by getting it done in this order. At the last hearing, I think I heard the applicants say that in order to allow for future replacement of the culvert to the size that was scaled by this old Horsley-Witten report for this new box culvert, larger culvert, which was done, the study was done without any contemplation of the steel sheeting. That was the concern, is whether that, if that box culvert is still going to be an appropriate size, or if there's any impact on the hydrology that would require a larger culvert and therefore make the town have to redo that study. That was sort of where that question came up from our concern about whether or not there was any hydrologic impact from that steel sheeting that would affect the future culvert size. But my clarification question is just that at the last hearing, I think the applicant stated that either there would be a gap in the sheeting or something to allow for that larger culvert. And I was just looking through the plans, and I was just trying to figure out where in the plans that was reflected, if they actually showed where that gap is going to be, or if there's just a section that's going to be taken out. And I just wanted to make sure for the record that it was clear somewhere. Thank you.
Good idea.
So they got out of order, Mike.
There's a lot of
There's a lot of sheets and a lot of plans.
Well, he's looking for that. Do we need to ask council or anything about the letter from Mass DOT, or do we take it in account or ignore
Well,
it, or? I mean, I know what I'd like to do.
I think it's valuable information, and I think going through it and reading that court decision and kind of kicking it around a little bit, I think there's still a yes. Again, it's one of those things that's tricky, is we do until it starts to have a greater than negligible effect on the project, and I think them applying for waivers from the setback regulations and those things, they're accounting for that, but they're still meeting the state performance standards, which are still the basis for our regulations. And when we look at our regulations, I guess we're looking at it more from the filter through the state regs first, if that makes sense.
Is that what so they're saying that they're only susceptible to the state wetland regs or to no wetland regs?
They're saying they're susceptible to the state wetland regulations.
Okay. It was not clear in this letter in the way I
No,
read this.
I know I read it a number of times. They're pretty clear that they're subject to state regulation under Chapter 131, Section 40, the regular act, and then 310 CMR, the regulations. What they're saying that they're exempt from are town-specific and local bylaws. There's some dispute to that, so they've kind of acknowledged and saying, well, you're going to be applying the state performance standards. There's obviously some local ones, but they've said, we understand that there's a waiver process, so we're going to be applying for the waiver that's here. We're asking you to grant that waiver. So what we'd essentially be doing is, they'd still be subject to when we'd be discussing that waiver, and then that way, there's no contesting whether they're subject to or they're not subject to, is they're accepting that waiver request and providing that to essentially expedite that process and not try to contend that they're exempt.
Has this only been filed under the state?
It's filed as a regular notice of intent, which would put it under both. Mass DOT is contending that they're exempt from local regulation, but what they've said is, we understand that there's also some case law and some things behind that if it's not a negligible, if it's a negligible effect, we're subject to the local regulations. So we're applying for a waiver under your local regulations, and we're taking your regular conditions that you're reviewing through the state performance standards. But as soon as your local regulations would say, we made them put in a package treatment plant for all their runoff based solely on the local bylaw, they would be exempt from that part of the regulations, because that's a greater than negligible effect. And you can argue whether it's, a penny is greater than a negligible effect, or $1 or whatever it is. But what they're saying is, we understand that we're still going to try to meet your performance standards. We've asked for a waiver for those that we're not sure that we do. We want to move forward with the project, and please issue out the waiver that you see fit for the project. It's essentially what they've done. So, trying not to pick a fight with Mass DOT too much, but
yeah, I understand that.
I think they're choosing to be compliant with the local regulations, and asking for that waiver is doing so. I guess what we're really looking at here, I think administratively we're in a good place. I think it's more a question of now whether or not the project as proposed is meeting the performance standards that we're judging this, or if the project as designed is providing enough protections to meet those standards, or if there are additional conditions that we can put on as they relate to primarily the state act that also help with that. So that's
Okay,
Kinda where
no,
we're
that's
at.
very thorough.
I guess what's confusing to me is this is on, if I understand it right, it's on town property.
Yes.
So the town is the property owner, and it seems like DOT is more, almost like they're the contractor, or they may be the funders, but it's not property of the Commonwealth, it's property of the town.
Well, this, and Mike may be able to explain this better, but I'll take a shot first, is what Mass DOT is doing for the town is they're accepting full responsibility and regulatory compliance for the project. And that, for lack of better terms, the town is essentially giving the land to the state to perform the project. It's kind of the
And they're going to
roundabout.
take it back, or?
Well, they don't really, there's no real, no papers are signed, but the town is saying, yes, we would like you to do this state-sponsored project on our land for the benefit of citizens of the Commonwealth. And it's one of those tricky things. It'd be kind of like working on Milestone Road. Well, it's technically, land of the county, and the town is, the road itself is a state-owned and maintained highway. So it's kind of that weird governmental overlap.
It's confusing for.
Yes.
Just for clarification on that, the town was co-applicant on this application, so it's not, exclusively Mass DOT. Well, the town manager did sign off on the application as the property owner, and there's no easements are involved with
No.
granting Mass DOT an easement over the property. It's just they're performing the project.
It's their project.
This is probably a really basic question, but I'm sure you guys went through all kinds of alternatives analysis as far as, and it probably is related to the dredging and cleaning up of Goose Pond, but as far as doing an actual railroad trestle or something where you remove that entire dike or barrier and put in something with a new road where you've got complete flow back there, did you look at all kinds of things, or is this just the best idea monetarily?
A complete evaluation, even avoiding this area, and then and looking at routing bicyclists along Francis and Union Street up to Orange Street was looked at. That required a lot of impacts to the buildings. It's not a very wide corridor to do that. So that was evaluated. The idea of a boardwalk through the area was evaluated. I think that would have even greater visual impact to the
It would be a tough one, I think.
impact, but that wasn't looked at because it was an attractive idea to some folks.
Well, I was going to say take out that entire dike and put in something where it's flowing completely underneath it like a little bridge, but that's probably.
It sounds like you're asking for a boardwalk. Is that essentially what we're?
No, I'm just saying, I'm sure you went through.
The idea of a wood platform area with railings that was lifted over this area to avoid it was looked at just for the scenic attributes and whatnot. But the cost, the maintenance, the visual impact to a lot of folks, just that option wasn't pursued, and this was the best option that was approved.
I know this isn't our purview, but I still, as a bike rider, one of the places, and I'm an experienced inner-city bike rider. I've been in traffic, but a place I avoid is Orange Street. And this, where you're going to dump traffic out onto Orange Street is like, that's the death zone there in this town. It's got all the semi-traffic coming off the boat. It's got all the traffic, the trucks, and the big pickup trucks going in and out of, more down at the lumberyard down there.
Mr. Chairman, I'll preface with the statement, I know this isn't our purview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
And I would suggest we sort of focus on what is within our purview and what we want to do here.
I just don't want to see a bunch of kids get run over because they think this is the way out of town,
I hate this.
I hate to say to that point that it is way off subject of this, but this is the first piece in a lot bigger concept, and this area is used by bicyclists. People say they use it, and to get the bicyclists off of Union Street and that Francis Street, I think this is a huge safety improvement for that area.
Yeah,
Whatever safety concerns there are at that crossing, that's used now. So just making that better, I think, is worth pursuing.
I think you're going to attract a lot more bicyclists to it now.
Sure.
Now it's kind of a hidden little gem of a walk down there, a bike ride. You put a path in there, it's going to be like, go this way, go this way.
As much as I hate to say this, I would say that's a great concern to raise with traffic safety or that work group.
Okay, sorry, it's just one of my own personal peeves. Yeah, Ms. McKinnon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the question about removing the entire berm sort of goes back to that study that was done to resize the culvert for a more appropriate exchange, and is sort of part of the other side of this area's project. So just looking at the detail of the plans here, it seems like the only thing that's specified where the steel sheeting is laid out is where it marks to retain the existing 2 18-inch culverts. And it doesn't necessarily show anything else in terms of an ability to put in a resized culvert in that location. So if their plan is to either leave a gap or to put a segment that can be removed, I just want to make sure that if that's what you guys are writing an order for permitting, that it's reflected somewhere, because it doesn't actually seem to be on the plans.
It's more, it's a matter of money and removal of it, make sure they can upsize those culverts, because that's got to be done. Water quality is
Well,
terrible.
I think too, not to speak for anyone, but I think looking at that as far as a permitting aspect goes, is obviously, as that gets used in the pilings that are there, I mean, I think updating that study regardless from when it was last done to best resize that culvert, especially, considering that the dredging and the amount of dredging may have changed from when they did that study for Goose Pond, depending on what is at the bottom of that right now. I think that's anyone's best guess. But
It's a small area. It's not that big.
it's small. I think to allow for that to happen, I mean, obviously, anytime that culvert comes in to get replaced, I mean, I don't think it's a big secret that even with the gap in the piling, to install a culvert in that spot, one is going to require substantial permitting from the Conservation Commission again, but you're probably also going to be talking about things like cofferdams and Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, the engineering and the amount of work to permit that going through is going to be fairly extensive. And I mean, I think even cutting, a 4-foot section of sheet pile out of from what's there, in the grand scheme of what that project will probably end up being, will probably be pretty small potatoes. I mean, that permitting's so involved. You're going to be dealing with Army Corps, Concom. You're probably going to have 404 permitting to do. You have to permit the dredging in and of itself for Goose Pond. I mean, it's a pretty extensive permitting process for that project, I think. So I think there'll be lots of review. I'm not trying to champion any project, but I think just for clarity on what to expect for that culvert project and some of the review that will go on, I think it will be fairly extensive. And I don't think it's, but it's certainly.
You're right. The sheet piling issue is probably a relatively small issue in that.
I think that's something that we can also address a little creatively through conditioning in the order, if that's the will of the commission to talk about proper sizing or sizing that appropriately, or certainly setting, I mean, we know what the distances across there is, maybe setting a factor through there that's not going to alter the design but will accommodate or to bring, that gap in compliance with what the original design is. I mean, I think less sheet pile was probably not a huge issue for the applicant in this case, if they need to shorten it by 2 feet on each end or however that will work.
Okay. So, anything else?
Check with Ian.
Ian, do you have anything else on this project?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. So, Mike, did you want to close? You have to request that we close the hearing.
I requested the commission close the hearing, and I again asked for the support of this important bike pedestrian project. I think encouraging bike pedestrian activity in this area is something that we want to do, and I think the best way to do that is by improving the facilities that already exist. And I think a positive vote from this commission will go a long way towards realizing that for the entire community.
Well, all we can do right now is close the hearing, and then we'll have to make up
We'll
orders
take
and
up
go
the-
through all that.
Yep.
So do I have a motion to close the hearing?
Second.
Okay. Got a motion to close the hearing, moved and seconded. Ian?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Ernie? Aye. Andy?
Aye.
Bam, aye. Mike?
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. Thanks, Mike.
Orders come later. Sorry. get a little more OT today.
The next four.
I'll pick up the 4.
You have time to fly Hawaii and drink it in.
Yeah.
Go and have a dinner break.
I may recommend when we do closing the hearings for the roll vote, you may ask if there's anyone that's dissenting first from closing the public hearing, and if there's no one, then just to do it unanimously.
Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, thank you. Just on the closure or any? Okay.
Let's just do it for the closure.
Okay, weed. Art and art. 41 Almanac Pond Road.
All right, this one was continued last time, Mr. Chairman, we were waiting for a response from Natural Heritage, and the applicant also was requesting the continuance to provide additional design to reflect the running of the utilities from the locust down to the end of the utilities at Almanac Pond.
Okay.
For the applicant, Gasparo of Blackmore Associates, along with Arthur Reed. As Jeff just mentioned, we have received a sign-off. We did receive a sign-off from Natural Heritage for the project between these two meetings, and with certain conditions, essentially a conditional letter of no take, which we expect to be incorporated into any order that you issue, and we are completely in agreement with. And then I did submit an additional 2 sheets, which just show where the utilities are going to be run within the existing traveled sandway of Almanac Pond Road. There's an existing utility pole near the Johnson Farm, and we would propose to pick up our utilities right at that utility pole and then trench them down the middle of the road. I explained in a letter that I submitted that it would be open and closed trench each day to just put in the conduits. It would be conduits for what I expect, conduits for telephone and cable TV, and then most likely direct burial primary cable so that we can get the transformers that we need up onto Locust. And we believe that by doing the project on a day-to-day basis and not leaving any spoil piles and working within the existing traveled way, that there'd be no impact to the interests protected by the commission. And with that, we'd be happy to try to address any questions or concerns that you may have with the project.
Any additional questions? Anything from the public on weed on Almanac Pond Road? Okay, Jeff, do you have everything we need to close the hearing?
Yes, sir.
Art, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
Is anybody opposed to closing? In that case, we'll close the hearing by unanimous consent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Now we're cooking.
I know you like to go around and get everyone's
Oh,
thing, but
yeah,
for closing, I think that's a quicker way to do it.
Okay, the Gallagher Revocable Trust at 2 Hornbeam Road.
Don Bracken of Bracken Engineering. This meeting was continued to hear back from Natural Heritage, which we have. We got the approval letter of no take from them. We also submitted additional information to support the waiver request. If you recall, one of the additions is 48 feet from the bordering vegetated wetland. The existing house right now is 47 feet. The house was built around 1998. At that time, it did comply with the 50-foot setback, but because of the change in the regulations of the definition of a wetland, the 50-foot buffer now encroaches further into the property. The area where the addition is going, where we're seeking the waiver, is flat, proposing a crawl space foundation for it, so it'll only be a 4-foot excavation, sill fence, relocating a septic tank. We'd like to help mitigate the impacts by the addition, with being 48 feet from the wetland, by proposing a dry well system for the roof runoff. Otherwise, there'll be minimum changes to the site. Grading, there won't be any grading changes from what's there right now. We also submitted the architectural plans, along with a letter from the architect explaining the reasoning for the position and why it couldn't be located further away from the wetland to get the 50-foot setback. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any further questions from the commission? Anything from the public? Okay, you ready to close?
We are ready to
Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
Move to close.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, is anybody opposed to closing this hearing? Then we'll close it by unanimous consent.
Thank you.
With Commissioner Carberg recused. That takes us to Gifford at 22, 24, and 26 Rabbit Run Road.
All right, this is another one that we continued from last time for word from Natural Heritage. This one's a little trickier from Natural Heritage. We did get a letter that, as far as any impacts for the Wetlands Protection Act, that they're satisfied. However, with the project and some of the work outside of our jurisdiction that's going on, they have kind of an ongoing MESA review process, and they've asked that the applicant not begin any work until that's completed, but it doesn't stop them from having an order of conditions issued.
And what they want to know is they want to give a MESA permit for a complete and total project. And in my conversation with them, I said, well, there's 3 lots involved here, and there might possibly be another house. And they said, well, they suggested, well, why don't you show where that would be? It would be outside of your jurisdiction, but it would make it a complete project and give us a total permit under the MESA regulations. So it was just a house cleaning thing. It wasn't a criticism of what we've done. And we just have to give them a plan that shows them that and what the square footage of the clear area would be for the total project.
Okay, thanks. Any further questions from the commission or the public? Okay, see not. You're ready to close, I take it?
I'm ready to close.
Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes.
Can I have a motion to close?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, is anybody opposed to closing the hearing? If not, then we'll close by unanimous consent with Commissioner Carberg recused. Okay, Monomoy Creek Realty Trust at 12 Monomoy Creek Road.
For the applicant, Arthur Gasparo and Arthur Reed, we're before you tonight for the second public hearing with respect to this notice of intent. We've provided a revised plan and some supplemental information based on the technical consultant's report and the comments that we had received at the first hearing. The additional information that we submitted was a letter that I prepared and 3 aerial photographs, which were from 1938, 1971, and 2005. The aerial photographs depict cutting in the area. I have them with me. I assume that you also have them in your packet. But this is the really the 1938 is of limited quality, but it clearly shows the structures that were there and quite a bit of clearing around the structures. 1971, you can see that it's almost identical. The limit of clearing, the path down to the beach, the same area. And so we feel that we've established that this cutting has been pre-exists the regulations and that it has been going on consistently since. I've spoke with the owners and they told me that they have done it to the same point on a regular basis since they've owned the property. That being said, I suggested that since this is a new project and there is a waiver involved with respect to the structure, that the commission would appreciate some buffer zone being provided and not going to exactly the same line that has been cut. And so what I've shown on the plan is to establish a 15-foot vegetated buffer to the resource areas, as well as to allow to naturalize the area that is under today's standards flagged as vegetated wetland. Mostly in the conversations that I've had with the owners, what I want to convey is that there was no intentional cutting beyond what it all, the first thing they said to me is, well, we just cut where, when we bought the property, was cut to, and when I looked at the aerial photos, that clearly, proved out as well. That being said, what we've done is to show a proposed silt fence at essentially 15 feet off of the resource areas and almost everywhere, except for in this area, you can see that that would be difficult to do and then be able to move the existing house. So that's why I labeled this one a temporary silt fence. So essentially, to do this work, you'd put a silt fence in here, and then once the house was moved, you could bump it out to that 15 feet. Just trying to think it through. The other piece of information that had been asked or brought up during the first hearing was with respect to structural areas within each of the buffer zones, and so we have a chart here on the plan that shows driveway and structure existing within 0 to 25, and then 25 to 50, and then what's proposed within each of those areas as well. And I think that what is quite obvious is that we have quite a bit of structural area that's now within 25, and we're moving completely outside of the 25. We are increasing structural area within the 25-foot zone to, within the 50, but not the 25, to a coastal bank by definition in this area, but not to the vegetated wetland resource area. And again, I would reiterate, as we mentioned in the first hearing, that this particular coastal bank is heavily vegetated, not eroding, not providing sediment to the nearby resource area. It does serve the function for storm damage prevention, but again, we believe that the waiver would not impact the ability to for that coastal bank to continue to serve that purpose. And so with that, we believe that the project is justified. It does provide a long-term net benefit and improvement from existing conditions. We have kept the proposed pool and cabana completely outside of the 50-foot zone to any resource areas. And with that, we'd be happy to address any outstanding questions or concerns that you may have with the application.
Any other questions from the commission or the public?
Bruce.
Oh, Mr. Perry.
Good evening. Bruce Perry. I guess I have a question on the fact that it was mowed back in 1938 and a couple times since then. I don't think that gives it a grandfathering status. I mean, after a certain time of not being done, you lose that status. And the aerials, more recent aerials showed it that it wasn't mowed between 98 and 2005. So I think if you're agriculture, you have to use your field 3 out of 5 years to maintain your agriculture exemption. In this case, it was less frequently than that it was treated. So I think that the commission should require him to do his 25-foot minimum undisturbed buffer to the wetlands and not 15 feet, because I think they lose some of their grandfather status by not doing it. So I guess that's my question and comment.
Thanks, Bruce.
Our understanding from the clients and from what we've seen, I don't know whether different pictures may have been taken at different times of the year and didn't depict it, but that the work, and they've owned the property since, well, way back in the, at least back into the 70s, I think. From everything that we know, it's been cut this way all the way back in time.
But if Bruce is saying from...
We have the 05 right here that shows the cutting that I submitted, so I guess I'm a little confused as well.
No, it doesn't.
And I submitted it.
On this, I'm just trying to place
That
this.
seemed very confusing to me.
Comparing this right here, so there's a lot more vegetation around this little house. So where are we lined up?
We're not,
That's 05.
if I may, that's over here on the other property. So we're looking at the big house there, and
Okay.
everything is, everything we're
around it.
talking about is, right, exactly, on number 12.
And I think as the land manager, I would have to question whether to cut it means you have to cut it every year, or if you have a management program that is managed every, like some of our burn units, I think we'd argue they've been under management for quite a long time now, but they get burned every 5 to 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean we abandon the process because we haven't done it for 5 years, but that is our process, to do it every 5 years. So I don't know how we rectify that under these kind of conditions. I mean,
Jeff, do you have any?
Well, I think the easy answer to this is, well, not really easy answer, is when we look at it and the evidence that's presented and before us from the applicant and their statement of management of the land, we can look at it as an activity, and we can certainly permit, the revegetation of areas and the amount that's there and the possible, memorializing of a specific area through a permit and physically on the ground to establish some kind of undisturbed buffer zone that we have and maintain and that we can enforce going forward without dispute. And what that distance is the applicant's proposing 15 feet. Our typical regulatory standard, if it was free and clear of all obstructions in history, is 25 feet. And I think what you guys are going to have to decide as a group is we're seeing a practice over time. There may have been a stretch that was abandoned. If you need to decide what the best course of action is going to be, whether it's 10 feet, 15 feet, 25 feet, 30 feet. I mean, 30 feet we're probably pushing because you wouldn't be able to really justify it, but really from 25 in for what was there. I mean, and if it's 15, it's 15. If it's 25, I mean, I guess the applicant can try to justify that 15 is the number, and I think they've provided documentation showing that it's been a historical practice, so.
25 would essentially go through the middle of the house, or where would 25 be on?
Well, I think it's more of a concern from the, at least in my opinion, from the, that wetland that's on that upper portion than necessarily the bank. Because the bank is kind of a policy bank anyway.
Right, no, I understand. So this wetland here or that one?
Right here, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes, the one that was mowed. That's actually another 10 feet on that would be a relatively small impact on that size of a lot, but.
Where's the 25-foot mark?
This line.
That's 20, so, and that's what you're allowing for mitigation to regrow, is
That's
all the way to
correct.
25 feet on that?
No, 15.
15, not to 25.
That's
Okay,
correct.
I'm sorry, I misheard you.
And if you look all the way back on the 1938 photo in that area, it's really quite wide open.
Well, I mean, I agree that it was in the past.
In here,
I don't
and
think
again, I have to agree that we've been told by the property owners that this is what they've maintained. I'm not, again, perhaps a particular aerial photograph was taken, and I'm not from, I didn't cherry pick and choose between not submitting a certain one to show. The reason I used the ones that I did is that I actually purchased these from historicaerials.com, and these aren't actually even based on the town system, just so that they would all be identical. And sometimes I would go and then look at, what other information might I have available from other sources from the town or whatnot. But when I did it this way, it gave you the same exact snapshot. So when I saw that 387105 plus testimony or verbal evidence from the property owner to me, I thought that it was extremely well established that, again, perhaps we even would say, that we don't even give 15 and talk to the commission about that simply had been completely a historic practice to that line. I saw it as, sort of, and I understand we're not here to horse trade, we're looking at protection of the resource areas, combined with what were the rights of what they could or could not do. And I would hope the commission would agree that I think that this, when you look at what you have and what's being proposed for the project before you, that I think that it's quite an improvement. That there's an awfully lot more buffer that won't be mowed, that was mowed historically, as well as in decrease in structural area. So when I combine both of those, and I fail to see how you know, you're going to have then a negative impact on the resource area by increasing the buffer.
Given how shrubby that is, it doesn't look like they mow it on an annual basis.
No, I mean, he said we did it regularly. You know, I didn't ask, was it every single year, or, you know, he said that we just mowed to when we mowed to what had been mowed before. My sense is that, you know, you have what's this tall and you have what had grown up this tall, and that's where they mowed to.
I didn't see any large stock in there or anything.
Not anything big, but there was a lot of shrubs in there, very shrubby.
Now, would the new lawn be an irrigated lawn? And
we didn't ask for irrigation as part of this, but yes, most likely that I wouldn't, you know, I would expect that it would be a maintained lawn, and that any, you know, to come back though, that would require approval.
And that would be in.
Irrigation
Well, it wouldn't be within 15, and I would expect that you likewise could condition the irrigation to not be within the 25 even, or to spray towards the 25.
Right.
That those heads could clearly, you know, I didn't include irrigation, and so at this point, it's not, you know, part of the application. Perhaps I should have, but I don't think that's worth holding this open for, I don't, you know, the app.
You ought
To
to
then add
certainly
it.
say that we have to come back for any irrigation within the lawn.
The fertilizer, this would be a very sensitive area for that.
We would fertilize out there.
Well, fertilizers have to be compliant to the BMP, so.
Right. That I sort of don't put the fertilizer piece into my applications anymore, since you've put the BMP directly in your regs.
This is why I wouldn't use them at all.
Okay. Anything else from the commissioner or the public here? Yeah, Mr. Perry.
Yeah, on a separate issue, and I haven't talked to Art. I spoke with Art after the last meeting. There's a clump of maybe 15 or 20 Japanese knotweed plants on the salt marsh side, and I was just, and he forgot to add it in, but I would just suggest that maybe you could put that they can go in and treat those while it's a small patch before it takes over that side of the property.
Yeah, we would welcome that condition. I mentioned it to the property owners. I didn't put it in the letter, but certainly subject to any conditions or reporting for, you know, we would do it in accordance with, again, best management practices.
Licensed applicator and all that stuff.
Absolutely. If you put that in the order, and that's how we'll do it, we'll report back to you, hope that we eradicated it and how we eradicated it.
That's definitely a net benefit there.
And I'd be glad to show them where it is whenever, if you give permission to do it, so that they can find it. It's not that easy to find.
We'll hunt it down.
Better to get them when they're small.
Yep. You can avoid the red weeder and huge patches. It's even better.
Okay. There's no further questions. Is everything we need to close it now? You ready to close, Art?
We are.
Have a motion to close.
Move to close?
Second.
Is anybody opposed to closing? Okay, we'll close by unanimous consent with Commissioner Carberg recused.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Salisbury, 18 Branch Point Road.
This one's easier to use the book. Thanks, sir. This one's easier to use the roll-up section.
Hi.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Dave Salisbury, 18 Brand Point Road. We've lived in the house for 17 years. House was built 30 years ago. The entire time of our ownership and predecessor's ownership, we've had a brick patio on the north side of the house. It's a two-story house. The brick patio is nice surface, but it gets slimy. It's a maintenance kind of problem over time. And what we'd like to do is simply replace the brick patio with a deck. The brick patio is a grade. We just get a little bit of raised decking so we get a little better drainage through gaps in the wood. Then move the pavers over to the east side of the house, which is a nice sunny side. That entire side of the house has always been grass. It's relatively flat, level. I'm before you tonight, or this afternoon, depending on how you look at it, because we're in the floodplain at Brand Point, like most of the houses. We're not within 100 feet of any known wetlands area. If there was wetlands, it would be sort of over in this quadrant, looking at the drawing.
Well, I will add really quickly, there is a 100-foot buffer zone that crosses a very corner of the property, but it's nowhere near the project area.
So the interest here are.
It's just
the
land
to
subject to coastal
absorb
storm flowage.
Floodwaters. Yeah.
Yep. That's it.
Sounds pretty straightforward. Any questions from the commissioner or the public? You're a lucky guy tonight.
Yeah.
Jeff, do we have everything we need to close the hearing?
Yes.
Would you like to close? Yes, I would. Okay, go ahead, Laura.
Second?
Anybody opposed to closing? Okay, then we'll close by unanimous consent. Thank you. Okay, Cooney, 65 on Oma Way.
This is a new owner.
Elizabeth Moran, agent for the applicant. This is a site at the end of Winoma Way. It was built originally in 1982. It's an existing single-family dwelling with a shed, landscaping, and a bluestone flooring in the rear. The wetland delineation was done in 2010. There was extensive work to find out the exact line, the barrier beach and such. You probably are familiar with the site. Our clients just purchased the site and are making some renovating the interior and would like to add some modifications to the exterior. The first being this covered porch on the front at the entry doorway. Basically,
On the road sign?
and everything's within the 100-foot, sorry. Everything's within the 100-foot buffer. So a portion of this, approximately 18 square feet, is within the 50, and that's just in order to connect it to the main dwelling. We're extending the second-story deck outside to 50 foot. Constructing a first-story deck under the second-story deck in place of a platform and shower. And then on the rear, the plan is to remove the steps and remove the patio door that's within the 25-foot no disturb zone. So that would benefit the wetland resource area. And then over here is a two-story proposed deck above existing lawn area, existing steps, and window well would be removed. So all of the area we're proposing is existing landscaped area, lawn area for all disturbed previously.
Any questions?
But the part, I mean, as far as this side, I have nothing to problem with that or that. But this side, how much of that, that's all within the 25 there, or?
Over here?
Yeah.
This is only this portion is within the 25.
Okay, so you have.
And it's an existing second-story deck.
It's
So
a
the
second.
only thing would be a first-story deck using the same
thing.
Same piers that are there, columns. I have a picture.
Okay, so not technically a structure under, or still a structure, yeah, no, still a structure.
It's still a structure.
Yeah.
Is existing.
Mhm.
And we would just add the second-story deck with those same columns. And there is a shower and
Mhm.
platform
Mhm.
to be removed, so.
Well, it's good to remove the shower. I'm always liking that, okay.
How far away is this proposed covered porch? Can you repeat that?
How far off the road?
Up the wetland line, up the.
How many feet?
Where's 25? 25 is.
25.
Actually, scale it, it's about 30 feet, Andy?
Yeah.
The one on the rear?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a tough one from
Mm-hmm.
There's a retaining wall there. Existing, a stone retaining wall.
I don't think it was approved, though. That's, I don't remember the retaining wall.
I remember seeing something. I don't remember that.
I don't remember it being, I'm sure it's there, but I don't remember
Yeah.
it being approved.
I think it was all bushy. Was that a new picture? home point am I losing?
No, it's not.
Okay. I think it's all grown over. Okay.
No, it was there when we were there. all
It
morning.
was, yeah, I sort of remember seeing something in the corner.
So we walked right in between the house and the wall.
Yeah. That's why it was on my feet.
It's a very interesting site.
Yeah.
Right on the old railroad grade.
Mhm.
Right that spot.
We've had 4 or 5 amended orders for this.
No, we had to move those AC units up.
Yeah.
And
Weren't
the
the
shed
AC,
was moved,
Yeah,
yeah.
the
and
shed,
different
the
things
bargaining
were
chip
done.
shed, yeah.
wasn't the AC units right where this proposed covered porch is going to be, or original?
No, the AC units, Sarah, are,
Mhm.
They were,
they're back further.
they
Okay.
were within the 25.
Mhm. But you're only removing these 2 steps and the patio door
On the rear.
on the rear.
It's just one, I mean, and we would not continue to cut it. But I think right now it's mowed.
Oh, so there's a give back? I mean,
Yeah.
if we had some mitigation, I think this would be easier for us to.
For that back one? I don't, the stuff in the front, I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty minor. Stuff in the front.
The stuff in the front, it's that one
I mean,
little
the back
covered
is-
second story.
I mean, it is, I don't know, it's, it's lawn, it's a retaining wall, it's
Yeah.
a step, it's a window well, and stuff, unused area. I mean, we would basically be pulling any
So-
backdoor use up off there.
So they want to build like a, and it says covered porch, so basically build a deck off here to cover for this door, right? And then a
Yes.
second
I
story
can
deck
show
too,
you
is
the
that what they're thinking?
architectural
Yeah.
This is what it's from
I see,
last
so build a
year.
deck and then build another deck and put a door on top, so.
Use the back.
Yeah.
But this is being removed, there's patio doors, the work windows and all of that.
Are they putting stairs in?
The stairs are on top of that deck, which is
Oh, okay.
where the
Yeah.
shower was. So it's on the deck.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, so this is within, I'm just trying to look at the wetland. So it's out of the 25, but within the 50 on that corner? Is that right?
Yeah, 30
Correct.
something feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and they have applied for waivers under no adverse impact, no reasonable alternative.
It's basically previously disturbed. It's the area to build on, it's very small on this lot with the zoning setbacks.
Oh, yeah, no, we've been,
Yeah.
been there a lot.
Yeah.
Times, it's so constrained by wetlands.
I've done it for a while.
Yeah, this is a tricky site because there's a lot of other resource areas. I mean, you have vegetated wetland, barrier beach, coastal dune,
Yeah.
land subject to coastal storm flowage, coastal bank on part of the property response. It's a mess of wetlands.
And when they got it, when they purchased it, they got all the previous orders of conditions and.
Yes, everything.
Correct.
Yeah. We didn't have any monitoring associated with these previous orders, did we?
No.
And we've issued compliance certs for everything done up to now.
Yes.
That's it, I don't know, my narrative, it kind of goes over what's been permitted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did a
There's
good
a
job
lot of stuff.
on that.
Yeah.
Anything from the public on Cooney? Anything else from the commission? Okay, Jeff, do we have everything we need to close the hearing?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to close, Liz?
Yes.
I have a motion to close.
Good idea.
I'll take that as a second. Is anybody opposed to closing this hearing? Then we'll close by unanimous consent. Thank you. Okay, Gifford, 12 Oak Hollow Lane.
John, you're winning for tonight. You bring your own plans up every time.
I think it's actually not Gifford, it's 12 Oak Hollow Nominee Trust.
Oh,
I think there's just an error in the agenda.
That's my fault.
This project might look familiar to you. You approved an order of conditions for the lot to the south of us. It's an isolated vegetated wetland flagged by David Haynes. The proposed project involves constructing a driveway, cottage, and main dwelling unit. The only work within the 100 feet is a small corner of the cottage, about 5 feet into the 100-foot buffer, and the driveway. There will be no driveway or structures or anything within the 50-foot buffer. The closest area of work will be 41 feet from the wetland. And it runs parallel with the driveway. There's about a 10-foot strip that's going to be regraded to accommodate the driveway. We also have underground utilities and other grading work within the 100-foot buffer. The site is fairly level in that area. Proposing a small depression at the low point in the driveway just to help collect the water and filter it, rather than having anything go directly toward the wetland area.
Okay. Any questions?
This is just under our local bylaws.
Yep, this is just a local filing, so this is not against the state act.
Nope.
Anything from the public? Okay. Oh. Yes.
And a butter, Marie Hankey, 14 Oak Hollow, and I'd just like to point out that it is very wet there. It's, I don't know, I'm not seeing these plans. But if you want to look at it on the town map, you can see that it's a whole green belt area in there, so just hoping that you're going to keep it down to the minimum in that corner. That's something I'm concerned. It would be this corner down here, but there's a lot of land and wetlands in the area, so looks like a lot of destruction for the
If I may real quick,
wet corner.
just to help, the GIS map, and I hope Dathan isn't listening somewhere, the GIS map is kind of tricky because vegetated areas on the base map show up as those light green and those dark green areas. It's just a different vegetation type. There's actually a separate layer in there that's a wetlands layer. It's kind of a crosshatched. But I always recommend, we get a lot of calls in the office of people calling and saying, I have no problems because it doesn't show up on the GIS or my lot's covered. GIS is a really great tool to start looking at wetlands with. But on-the-ground location is there, and I believe this is one that, I know Mr. Perry verified the one to the south.
You have this delineated on this plan here, yes?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be an accurate delineation of what's affecting that site. But I always like to give my GIS plug because it comes up a lot.
So the work proposed is within our,
But it's great to check and come and see what's going on.
And it is pretty wet back
Oh, yeah.
It is, we don't want to disturb the Beavers, that's the wettest part, so, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so basically,
Well, thank you for coming
there's
in.
no waivers required on this?
yeah.
No, sir.
Meaning that it complies with our performance standards?
Yes.
Any questions? Any other questions from the board or the public? Okay, seeing not, Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to close?
Yes, we would.
Close?
Second?
Anybody opposed to closing? And that motion carries by unanimous consent. Thanks. Kosei at 141 Cliff Road.
Actually,
Really close to that, huh? Yeah. You're double recused.
You out of this?
No, she's definitely not. She lives right next door.
oh, yeah, I'll get you one more.
Looks like they took a beating over the winter.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors, representing the applicant, Gary and Healy Kosei. The Koseis own 141 Cliff Road and have a permitted set of beach stairs to the north of their property in which an order was issued and a certificate of compliance was issued for their construction and maintenance. The property itself is located quite a distance off of Cliff Road, and it's actually through a right-of-way over the Nantucket Conservation Foundation property in order to get access to the site. Regulated areas are a vegetated wetland, one located just adjacent to the top of the coastal bank. We have coastal bank, we have a coastal beach, and the bottom of the stairway is within land subject to coastal storm flowage, which is at elevation 8 in that vicinity. The Cosays themselves are older. They don't necessarily use the beach stairs anymore. However, they, when they do have guests, they do use the beach stairs. The issue has become over the years is the constant repair that's taken place due to the erosion that's occurred along the bank. So what they're proposing to do is construct a 10 by 12 platform at the top of the bank in the area of where the existing beach stairs are, and just put in seasonally a set of aluminum beach stairs from the top of the platform down to the bottom of the beach. The stairs themselves would be two 20-foot sections with side rails that they would put in and remove seasonally. They would, in the interim, take out all of the existing wood frame structure and supports that are now there for the existing beach stairs. And that's what...
Any revegetation?
I don't necessarily know if it would be... the bank there is fairly well eroded. There are pictures in the file. I don't necessarily know if it would take... but there is no plan right now for revegetation. It was simply to get rid of those beach stairs and then do this seasonal aluminum stairs, through their caretaker every year at the beginning of the season. We have been issued a file number. However, we are within a mapped National Heritage area, so we are waiting information with regard to their review of the project. So we do not have enough information to close tonight, but the application itself is, I think, fairly straightforward. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Oh, there is, because they're coming in two 20-foot sections, we are looking to put at least two supports at the junction of the stairs that would remain in place, that would be at the joint where the two 20-foot sections come together.
So you still have two, like, piling type?
So we'll have some type of support at that, just because of the manufacturer was concerned about with the way the angle is and where they'd like to see some support at the two 20-foot sections.
Well, removing it in the winter should actually help reduce the erosion in that location. It's kind of a slightly big platform at the top, but was there a platform before at the top?
A very small one. Nothing, not the size that we have here. So, and over the years too, because from Cliff Road, the paths on the Conservation Foundation property kind of go into. So, there's actually had been a path that could kind of form to the stairs because people used to come into the Conservation Foundation land and then work their way down the stairway. There is a small type of temporary fencing that's in that area only because they just wanted to discourage people using it as a public access to the beach. So,
any other questions from the commission? Anything from the...
I have a question. I'd like to see more what it's actually going to look like and where the piers are going to be and how they're going to fasten it down at the bottom.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Okay, well, I can kind of maybe walk you through it. We are going to be back next for the next meeting, but it's essentially, I have the spec of the picture of the aluminum stairs. It will not be fastened at the bottom because essentially it'll be connected at the mid-span, which are shown on the plan. The two supports are shown. There is proposed two supports are shown at the mid-span of the beach stairs itself. But I have
I see where it says proposed supports.
Yes.
But it's such a small scale that,
Okay. Well, what I can do, Ian, is I can do a...
everybody else is satisfied.
Yeah.
And how they're going to be put into the bank. It just...
Yeah, you want to see more detail from a profile angle or something like that?
Yeah, it sounds like he's looking for...
Well, unless the commission feels that some other members feel that it's not necessary.
Well, I think it would be interesting to know exactly what they are.
I think it'd be good, yeah.
Are they going to be...
Attached would be...
Yeah, are they going to be, how deep are they? Are they going to have concrete at the bottom or
Yeah.
just...
We can do a profile,
But I don't want that,
section through there, which would show And then I have the actual, I mean, they're an aluminum beach stair. It's an aluminum beach stair with a railing, but we can provide the detail on the supports.
What is the regular way of anchoring down the top landing?
Bolting it to the platform.
Bolting it to the platform.
And that's the
I
only
mean, I'm sorry, the platform, how's that anchored down?
Well,
And what do you do when it erodes the next
The
time?
question is, is it going to be cantilevered underneath it? Is it going to be actually just all on solid ground, or is there a cantilever back at an angle for the front leading edge of the platform?
Yeah, we don't want the same situation that we have with the beach chairs with the, that the platform continually has to be moved to. There would be some type of cantilevering up in there too, so.
The problem with
Again, we can show it all in a profile. But those are typically post down, like a standard deck at a house would be anchored in at the top.
My only concern with big platforms, and I totally understand why you want that for safety, is sometimes that becomes an erosional point. As soon as you put that platform at the edge, then you get scouring underneath that platform with wind and rain. But other than that, removing the stairs during the winter actually should help reduce the erosion effects from having it there the whole time.
Yeah, and typically what they'll do is only because of the elevation, is they'll take the aluminum ones that are out there, they'll just lay them over the edge, and they'll lay flat up against the top of the bank, and they won't even support them. This one is just because of the elevation difference where it is necessary to do something mid-span.
But revegetation would protect them too. But I'm assuming they're worried about cost or.
I don't necessarily. I mean, they've just become a maintenance issue for them. As I said, it's kind of, if it was up to them, they probably wouldn't even have them. But they do have, they do like to have. They have the beach access. They'd like to, kind of maintain it. So. Okay.
Anything from the public? Anything else from the commission? Okay, so.
Holding it open for natural
And
heritage.
you want to continue for 2 weeks?
That's fine.
So we'll continue this unless I hear an objection to the 28th. Okay.
It's our first continuance of the
Thank you.
I know.
Okay, that takes us to amended orders. Fong Iman, 34 Codfish Park Road.
Thank you again, Paul Santos. For the applicant, this is a order of conditions that was issued for a septic repair out in Codfish Park. It's a small lot down at the end, to the northern end of Codfish Park Road before you kind of make that left-hand or turn or work your way around to come back up around the bottom side of the inner loop roadway there. At the time, the client was Romney Fong Eman. The property has been sold. The current property owner is Robert Reskin. And this was the plan in which we came before the commission. I had asked at the time for the septic repair, but an IA component was required due to the location of the coastal bank, or the coastal dune across the street, which is on basically where the Jersey barrier is set up on the other side of Codfish Park Road. I needed waivers from the Board of Health for the project with regard to the setbacks to property line, setbacks to the existing structure, the size of the lot, and so forth. And in doing so...
From the Board of Health, you had to get waivers for setbacks?
Yes. Set to property lines and so forth, only because to try to get the system in there.
Between the building and the system.
Between the building and the system, between the system and the property line. And it's basically was a local upgrade approval for a number of other items too. It's basically, this lot itself is a, less than 5,000 square foot lot, and it's got a five bedroom cottage on it.
Wow.
So at the time, however, we're not within any of the Board of Health's watershed protection districts. And at the time we went to the Board of Health, we was questioned on what was the need for the IA system. And subsequent to that, Richard came before this board and spoke specifically about this project and maybe other projects that might be particularly in this area, and felt that it was unnecessary to have the IA systems within this particular area. We know you review these on a case-by-case basis. So what we did at the time was felt the commission might entertain the amendment of the order to do away with the IA system requirement. And that's what this application is for. The system size will continue to be the same. It'll be two trenches on the site. We'll still have the septic tank, a pump chamber, but we will do away with the IA Septitech component. Again, due to the fact that it's serviced by town water. We're not within any of the Board of Health's nitrogen-sensitive areas or watershed protection districts. And what we're asking for is an amendment of the order to do away with the IA system component.
And the Board of Health recommended that you could do that.
Correct. And in fact, the Board of Health, I did include the Board of Health meeting minutes in there with regard to the staff recommendation, and it says replacement of a failed system, compliance of this very small lot confines to only one location of the septic. The plant went to Concom, which mandated the use of an alternate technology on this property. Concern is that the groundwater flow toward the ocean won't affect wells. Don't see a need for the alternative technology system. Ask the board to approve the variances. Then we'll go back to Concom to request that they lift the alternative technology requirement, as it usually only for wetlands. This goes to the ocean. Richard felt fairly strong about it, and unsolicited, he came to the commission and spoke. I don't think Sarah was there that evening. It might have been on. I think you were on the phone, and then that's why.
I would have disagreed.
Yes, we understand that. And then that's when. So that's what we've done. We've asked for an amended order to do away with that component.
Okay. Questions from the commission?
Do you know how deep that groundwater is there?
Yeah, I've got it actually on the abutting lot. We didn't hit any groundwater on our lot. HWH map has it at elevation 2, and there was groundwater was at elevation 3 on the abutting parcel. The site itself is up around elevation 15. Yeah, the grade around this existing site's 15. Groundwater was HWH map 2, and then the abutting site had a groundwater elevation at 3. We couldn't even get down that deep, only because the system. The hole was caving in, and we were too close to the foundation to keep on going. So,
are the trenches actually sized for alternative systems? You can usually get by with a smaller trenching, smaller leach field than with the standard system. Do you
correct.
have to increase the size of the leach field?
No, leach field would be the same size. Okay. You can actually, under the variance provisions of local update approval, you can reduce up to 25% without an IA system, just based on site constraints themselves.
Okay.
So the system does not exceed, and anything over the 25% would require not only local approval but DEP approval. So no, the system would still stay the size it is, would still have that tank in the front, and it might be that I might be able to actually get this without having a pump system. I might be able to do it I might have it be able to be gravity flow. The system is it's high, it's minimum amount of cover we can have, and the system is up as high as we can get it here, only because there was no constraints with the groundwater. So, and the system to this is just outside the 100-foot setback, but the system that was here was just repaired recently. Obviously, and they didn't need or have to have an IA system. They didn't even have to come before the board. So this system was just repaired just recently also.
And I think actually when they put this in, when this came before us, they offered the IA system.
This one?
Yeah.
No, I originally asked not to have the IA system.
Okay.
But, I didn't have the Board of Health. At that time, it was early on in the process. And the discussion was to require the IA system. And I know this lot I've got right here, too. There's actually, to kind of give you a little bit of background to what's out there right now, there's actually 3 cesspools, or 3 pits on the lot. The kitchen has its own pit, the front bath, and then each of the bathrooms have their own. So there's actually 3 cesspools or pits on the site right now that we're doing away with. Yeah. So.
So is it still an upgrade?
It's still an upgrade.
Yeah.
Well, any...
No, that's the first time Richard ever came in, I've been on the board.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I wasn't here, because I'm actually asking the state to provide to the health department results from the state of the bay and all the work in Nantucket Sound and off to the ocean side of the Cape, measurements of higher nitrate from septic. So I'm also asking Brian Howes to provide a update on his statements that aren't actually still considered true, that there's an infinite amount of capacity. Because the state can actually measure the impact away from the islands and away from the harbor of septics. So that doesn't mean that this...
How do they know it comes from septics?
Because you can tell that it's mainly nitrogen and it's away from areas that are fertilized, and it's way off south of Tuckernuck, it's south of the island, it's in areas where there's no fertilizer that's used. So they can, and you can look at N15.
South of the island, how would they know
You
where
could,
it comes from?
well, it's not going to, there's no currents from areas where fertilizers are used where it's going to wash over from there, where there is, I mean, this is in the last 2 or 3 times. Anyway, that doesn't mean that this is a problem. I'm just asking the state to provide to our local health department the current information, because in my opinion, I'm not sure Richard has that. And the same with Brian. I'm just asking Brian to, either update his comments, or if he still stands with them, to update that.
He's not usually very forthcoming with any data to support
I'm
theories.
aware of that, but the state has been lately. This came up in the Cape Cod and Sletton's meeting actually on Saturday that Jeff and I were at.
Yeah, this is a seasonal use cottage. Yeah.
That doesn't mean this is a problem here. I'm just asking the state to to back up this, so it's not me just ranting.
Okay. Well, Jeff, do we have a recommendation?
I would recommend that you could consider this as amending of an order of conditions. That's for sure. It's up to you guys. What I would say, it's appropriate to consider as an amendment. Whether you guys decide to issue it is up to you guys.
Sure.
I got a curiosity question. The startup of a cold system, seasonal systems, the IA system, same issues that an IA system that a very old traditional system has?
That's a good
Just
question.
the time for the bacteria and the
Well, the bacteria issue with any seasonal type system doesn't function as it normally would anyway. You don't have that. You've got a small period where, you're putting effluent in the ground. That mat, the biomat isn't forming as it would under a natural condition. Whether it's IA or whether it's...
the same issue applies to the IA.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same one either way. And, we're in a sand situation, too, so it's, it's...
That doesn't mean this isn't appropriate.
No, I know. Just curiosity. I mean, these seasonal places are kind of, people come out for 2 weeks and the system get going, and it just does. You wonder how good they are, any of them.
Yeah, I wouldn't, you would want to have town sewer for Codfish Park.
Yeah, there is, the sewer district is nearby, but not close enough where I think they'd ever extend it down to these, homes.
Well, the loss from, potential, it's creating now, but it's not always going to be the case.
And I know I've got Joan Godot, who's right next door here. She's been in that home for quite a while, again, seasonal. And I know she's looking at an upgrade too, because when we did the variance procedures, I did speak to her. So this is one here that, so there were a few of them, like I said, this one was just repaired over here.
And they're all on town water, every
Yeah,
house?
but most of these, everyone down there, I think, the ones at least that I've dealt with over there have all been on town water. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so do I have a motion to
If you could
approve this as a amended order?
close an issue.
Oh, close an issue? Hearing and issue the amended order?
Wait.
Or close the hearing and issue an amended order?
Move to close.
And issue.
Isn't it 2 different votes, or is it one vote? I mean, you can't close it without...
Well, if you guys want to do it separately, you can certainly close the hearing first
I
and then
would
take a
close
vote
it.
on issuing.
Move to close.
Okay.
Okay. Do I have any objection to closing the hearing?
No, sir.
Okay, so then we'll close the public hearing by unanimous consent. Now, can we just go ahead and issue the amended order, or do we need to do that through the
Voice voted, I think.
orders of conditions thing?
We can take it up now. I mean, we're moving into that next, so I'll just run through it quickly. All it is really adding is the conversion of the approve Title V to the conventional system as proposed.
Okay, so do I have
Motion to issue.
I'd like to do a motion to issue.
Okay, now we need to go through a voice vote.
What, need a second first.
I have a second. Second. Okay. So, Ian,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Sarah,
Nay.
Ernie, aye.
Andy, aye.
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 So that motion carries with Commissioner Okai opposed.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now we go to the public meeting, certificates of compliance. Kaplan at 8 Harborview Way.
All right. This one was 4-1, old folder. This was for, I never remember. My brain's not. This was for the removal of portions of an existing structure, construction of an addition, relocation of portions of the existing dwelling, and replacement of an existing foundation within land subject to coastal storm flowage. Upon our inspection, it appears that everything was done in compliance with the plan of record, and the as-built reflects that as well. There are no ongoing conditions with this, so I would recommend the issuance of the certificate of compliance.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
And second.
Second.
I think we could do this as a,
If you did a, if there's any dissenters.
is anybody opposed to issuing this certificate? Then we'll approve it by unanimous consent. Okay. Orders of conditions. Start with the fun part. Orders, Pond Lane.
I drafted a bunch of stuff. We don't have to, anything that's there, we don't have to issue tonight, but I drafted stuff from instructions last time and went to discussion, so.
Let's clear the decks.
Feel free, as many of them as we want.
Should we do the easy ones first?
No, we're
I shot
sure.
and had free time, so.
You had free time? I always have stuff for you to do.
I know. Well, I was working on something else. I was doing a lot of phone calls, so.
You want a package motion on items 1 through 10 here, or?
No, let's not.
Well, number 9 didn't close, so number 9 is out. So,
Well, let's see here.
again, we don't have to issue any of them tonight, but we had instructions for some of the old ones
Well, we
to
got a lot of
draft,
easy ones.
and then to go through and do the new ones. That were fairly straightforward for what they would look like, so.
This is all the letter from, pretty involved,
Well,
from,
we need to pick one to start with, and then we'll.
Well, I thought we were going to start with
you want Goose
Mass
Pond?
DOT and Goose Pond.
Okay. That's probably, no black oak, what is that?
Yeah, they originally had some black oak plantings on their plan of record. So we had specifically called it out in my instruction from last time to include a condition to make sure there was no black oak. So put a condition that there's no black oak. The other ones that we added there, we had concerns about invasive species, so we had any material removed from the site to be put through the digester. And then I really just had kind of a photo inspection condition. That was there. Not a long way.
And is the current plan all up to date for this one?
Yes. The one question that came up was for that culvert, but they're leaving the gap for the existing culvert, and I'm not sure. I think part of the issue, just my personal thought on it, is I think there's some question on what the actual sizing of that culvert is going to really end up being after they relook at it and do some of the
They're going to have to do some
hydrology again.
calculations.
Obviously, sheet pile in the area changes it at some point to some degree. I don't think there's any dispute that even if it increases the flow by a gallon a minute or whatever it's going to be, it's still a change that.
Well, and they've done upgrades on the other side of the road,
Correct.
too, that has to be refactored into the calculation.
Right, there's stormwater things that
Yeah,
affect
there's
it.
a lot
I
of
think,
stuff happening down there.
I think the other real big question too is when they really quantify the sheer amount of material that's going to have to be removed from Goose Pond and what that's going to do to the
Hydraulic.
depth and the bathymetry of the pond, that may change what the flow requirement or the.
I think they're going to change it 4 to 8 feet.
Yeah, I think that culvert project has a lot of really big moving parts still.
My only concern is really just, well, I have several concerns, but, they might be spending a lot of money to resurface and put this in and have to pull out 50% of it. It's not our business if they waste their money, but sometimes when you rush ahead because you have free state money, you put in something that then is pulled out, which is not my money. So.
Which is also outside of our.
That's what I just said. It's outside of the two concerns I have is the sheet piling restricting what exchange is happening through the berm and increasing the runoff by going from a very permeable, gravelly soil type thing to something that's asphalt. So in a wetland. So this is. But I'm all for the bikes.
Yeah.
I'm all for the bikes. I love having the bikes. I'm not.
Not to be technical, but the project is technically in the buffer zone to the wetlands.
Yeah, it's out of the wetlands.
So-
Only because
Only
that
'cause
berm
that-
is already there.
Only
Only
because the
because the
berm is
railroad there,
existing.
yeah.
But it is there.
I'm just going to.
So-
But it can
Well,
contribute to
it's a
both.
big regulatory difference whether it's in the resource area or in the buffer zone.
Yep.
So to be clear, this project is located within the buffer.
But no other road
Barely.
has been placed as someone, like, I wouldn't pave my dike road that separates the freshwater marsh and saltwater marsh. just
Mr.
because-
Chairman, I'd make a motion to issue the order as drafted.
Do I have a second?
We've done discussion.
Apparently.
Guess so.
And I will second it.
Is there any more discussion on the motion? I don't know what we're going to change.
It may be nice to have a gravel surface or something like that.
I would prefer a permeable surface.
I would prefer a
really
permeable
don't give or
surface.
take on
Like I'm
that.
saying,
so.
I know that they say.
On
I
any-
would like to know what kind of percolation, which I think I'm disappointed in, is we don't have data that shows how much is percolated there.
No.
It's certainly going to be more than a paved surface.
I wonder, after having trains on
Yeah.
there and stuff, how much it
Oh,
percolates.
it still has some absorption, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably some, but.
Even asphalt does, but, it's compacted, but it's not that compacted. And wetland scenic views, you can argue this just on wetland scenic views. This is one of those toughies where you've got safety, and I'm all for bikes. You've got safety and transport of people, and wetland scenic views, and hydrology and percolation in an area that's very susceptible to, it's close to the scallops, it's a high concern area. So I see why you want to improve it, and they've got free money to do it. That doesn't mean I'm going to vote yes.
Oh, okay, I've got a motion made and seconded. Okay, we'll have to do a voice vote on, or not a voice vote, but a
Yeah, voice vote.
roll vote. Ian?
I'm extremely conflicted, and so I'm abstaining.
Fair enough.
Okay. Jen?
Nay.
Sarah?
Nay.
Ernie? I'm going to actually vote for it, even though. Yes. Andy?
Aye.
No,
Pam?
no.
Mike?
Aye.
It's 3 to 3.
Okay, 3 to 3.
3 noes and 3 yeses.
Because you've got 7
No, you abstained.
commissioners. Oh.
Ian
Oh, you
abstained.
abstained.
Well, again, we don't have to issue this tonight. It's not required to do. We have 21 days. So,
So we have a tie vote, so should
Yeah.
we?
So you're going to bring back a negative?
Part of the reason why I abstained is because it seemed rather vague on to what extent, it's going to change the dynamics visually. There was sort of a fudge factor whether they were going to use a triple fence or a double fence, where the fence was going to go. There were a lot of things that were still up in the air, and it was very much a take it or leave it approach, it seemed
Right.
to me. So,
Same with the cores and
Well,
stuff
would
like
you
that.
like to vote then, Ian?
They can always come
well,
back. if they
we can
want.
always add some of those are concerns that people have for visual impacts. For 2-rail or 3-rail fence, we can always add conditions too that
I thought they
No,
came
he
back
was
on
just-
a two-rail.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, if there's things that are there, people have specific concerns, I mean, we can certainly condition.
My concerns are they didn't provide us with the soil cores and any give or take on the surfacing. And,
Yeah, I mean, if we were to say we wanted to have like a brownstone surface, do they have to necessarily follow? I mean, they made it pretty clear that they didn't have to listen to us.
Well, it's one of those, when we look at it in
that's a good
the
point.
terms of the state performance standards, if you guys require, because you feel there's going to be an adverse impact from the runoff, that a permeable surface is better, you guys can certainly condition a permeable surface. And if they don't like it, they can come and amend their permit to include reasonings or to demonstrate why they don't need a permeable surface if that's what's permitted.
I've presented for Cambridge Street before, State Department of Transportation information on asphalt and on the runoff characteristics of the chemicals that come off of asphalt. I mean, it's commonly known for site design that there are benzenes and volatile organic chemicals that aren't good for wetlands on either side, even impacted
I
ones.
question how much it would hold up out there, especially if that type path goes underwater on occasion. Asphalt would have a short life.
Yeah. Well, that's, I mean,
That's not our.
Well, you guys, the role you guys have here is when you review it and you review it against the performance standards, to condition a project to meet performance standards or waive regulations, or to say, we can't do it. I mean, if you feel that converting the surface to a permeable surface gets them there and in compliance with the State Wetlands Protection Act and our local act, then so be it. That's a condition. That's what you're here to do.
Well, so what do? We've got a tie vote, so the motion failed to carry.
The motion failed to carry is we can continue to work on the positive order. We can make suggestions and bring back another draft. We can put together negative orders. I mean, we have 21 days to issue this thing, so it's no.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
And we're meeting
okay,
next
so
week.
let's,
And we're going to have a special hearing next week, too. So we can always take it up again next week if there's another draft.
Right.
I mean, that's,
okay.
So we probably should have, like, positive one we have now, a positive one that includes a different material for the surface.
We should give the staff direction on what to prepare.
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
We should do,
Yeah.
like, prepare a whole menu of different things for
Right.
us to pick
Well,
from.
this one
Yeah.
didn't pass.
This
Yeah.
one
No.
didn't pass.
Throw it
yeah.
away, deny it, do whatever
Right,
you
yeah.
do, yeah.
well, I think what I'm hearing is something that clears up, conditions that clear up the scenic view issues, and then
And the permeability.
the surface. Are there any other issues? I mean,
Are
we
there
can-
ways that we can fix the vagueness with hydrology from,
I don't know, that's getting pretty complicated for us to start
yeah,
saying what
do
they
we
need
want to
to
have
do.
the soil cores put
It's
into
gotta be engineered.
the record? Because that's one thing.
Well,
Well,
the
the record
hearing's
is closed.
Yeah, yeah. that's
So
true.
we're done. I mean,
I mean,
that's-
how would a gravel surface hold up to flood waters? I mean, I would think it.
I would use the
Other
pavers
options.
like they use
Pavers.
Woodbury, something
How
that's
we're going to
absorbent.
make the argument
Oh, pavers
that
are nasty.
putting pavers is going to allow for appreciably more percolation through the surface than the pavement they suggested?
There's tons of data with the State Department of Transportation that actually shows percolation rates for a whole range, from cold asphalt to hot asphalt to pavers to gravel. They're the king of providing this data.
We
The
have
other
that- we
thing
have that
that's,
data in as part of our hearing?
the Mass Department of Transportation can provide it. I mean,
We
it's
have it on
known.
record, part of our hearing.
well, it's not part of the record. They can't add
It's-
new
So we're
information.
going to be introducing some other stuff into this.
It's known that the percolation rate is higher for other materials. The other thing is asphalt is comprised of contaminants that get into wetlands. With the scallops right there, I mean, there's just not very many other areas that are so prone to disturbance that are so important. I mean, there's almost no other area where there's scallops that are, and eelgrass than in this area. That's why the Goose Pond being so degraded has always been a concern. It's considered one of the primary inputs of bad water into our harbor, is that area. I just don't want to make a bad thing worse and knock off, 5% of the scallops.
Like I said, I
Yeah.
personally would like to see something that's a little more permeable.
Yeah, I mean,
And there are
it's,
multiple options.
there's multiple, and the Department of Transportation has all that information at their disposal
Right.
because they have to.
Well, I guess what I'm hearing is an order of conditions that contains a more permeable option as the surface.
Yes.
Is what I'm hearing. All right. I can certainly do that.
A non-asphalt option. Because it's not just, my point was not just the permeability, but also the
And
runoff.
also the fuel aspect.
Yep. Top of my list. So I will add those things in, and then we'll bring it back for our hearing next week. We'll do it after the other deliberation.
I think there's some like frag down there, you're not going to see that fence.
Yeah.
I mean, it's buried in frag, it's 8 feet tall.
The frag is actually helping protect the harbor.
Yeah, but it's ugly.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't think you're going to see anything.
All right. Well, I'll make those changes. That's why we do drafts. We can make changes and try to spell them out, figure those things out.
Okay. Weed. I think I didn't, do you have that one?
Yep.
Yep.
Weed Realty Trust, this one I had instructions before. This is the project that Art presented for the underground utilities in the driveway on the Norwood Farm properties. So I know this is a little daunting to read and look at. I just attached the letter from Fish and Wildlife, but really the important meat and potatoes of it here are the conditions at the bottom of the second page, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are there. I had originally written it and just included those, and I just felt like the context of those conditions was kind of missing by not putting the whole letter in. So I put the letter back in.
That's actually nicely done.
It's good. It's a good letter. I think they cover it. Other than that, I really couldn't think of any other real conditions to have. I thought the protocols were pretty solid, so.
I think the symbolic fencing is a good idea. But for some of these conditions, these are all from Thomas French. So what, did you put in these two? I'm trying to figure out. The
Nope.
1 through 5 you put in? Or
No, the 1 through 5. The letter that starts with the header here, I wrote none of. That's
Okay.
straight from Division of Fisheries and Wildlife.
Okay.
So on the page prior, what our normal page looks like, literally I have just our basic one and then that number 19, that the work shall be done in compliance with
Okay.
the letter from Fish and Wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I needed to reinvent the wheel from their conditions that were there.
That sounds good. I would move to issue as drafted with the amended letter added. If people have had time to read it.
Yeah, that sounds good. Do I have a second? Okay, we'll take a roll vote. Ian?
Aye.
Jen?
Abstain.
Abstain.
Oh, yes.
Or recused.
Sarah?
Aye.
Aye. Andy?
Aye.
Dan? Aye. Mike? Aye. Okay, that motion carries with Commissioner Carberg abstaining, or recused, excuse me. Okay, then we go to 2 Hornbeam Road, Gallagher.
All right. This is another one. This was for the removal of existing portions of a dwelling, constructions of additions, relocation of a septic tank, relocation of a sewer line, and then grading, landscaping, utilities. I couldn't think of any real conditions.
This looks pretty straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward. Now, this was the one that the waiver required was for the corner of the proposed addition that was 49 feet away from the wetland area. It was just a little slice.
Do you have to refer to the note take from Natural Heritage in your findings?
No.
Okay. I'm just asking. Okay, I'd say move to issue as drafted.
Second.
Okay, Ian?
Aye.
Jen?
Recused.
Oh, Sarah?
Aye.
Ernie? Aye. Andy?
Aye.
Bam? Aye. Mike? Aye. That motion carries with Commissioner Carberg recused.
Portion of the new
By 4 in a row.
Jen opts out on.
So you're out of all of these again?
just to, down to Monomoy.
Mike, these three.
Salisbury, come back.
Okay, Gifford on 22, 24, and 26 Rabbit Run Road.
All right, this was also the one from Mr. Haynes that I had instructions for from last time. This was for the abandonment of the driveways, construction of 2 driveways, and then construction of a single-family dwelling, and then the other parts within the buffer zones to the bordering vegetated wetlands, isolated wetlands, and coastal bank. There are no waivers for it. Again, I was just kind of couldn't think of any conditions to impose or additional conditions to impose. So,
No, without any waivers, so.
no.
Move to issue as drafted.
Okay. Ian. Jen.
Recused.
Sarah.
Aye.
Ernie. Aye. Andy.
Aye.
Bam. Aye. Mike. Aye. That motion carries with Commissioner Carberg recused.
We'll stamp, a recusal stamp for you for these orders. Because people think, was she ever there? And you're like, you're always here, but you have to. She's kidding. You contribute big time, and when she can. You're welcome. We're excited you're here.
Okay. Monomoy Creek Realty Trust on 12 Monomoy Creek Road.
All right, this is one that we closed tonight too. Actually, all of these are. This was Arch project that we talked about for a little bit. This is the project that we need to add to the permit overview, the removal of Japanese knotweed. Which will include an amendment to condition 19, that the photographs to include the knotweed area too. Then I would also propose that our standard knotweed conditions with the permitting of the, I just don't remember off the top of my head, the correct knotweed herbicide suite to herbicide suite to go with it, and the correct percentage. I just don't have it right in front of me, so I don't. I don't want to butcher that
20%
language.
or so? I don't want
But
to.
it allows for, I want to say it's 20%.
25%.
I always mix them. I had the glyphosate one. Glyphosate.
And, Bruce still here? No.
No,
I
he
hate
took
to
off.
say it, but the evidence is really piling up against glyphosate, by the way.
Oh, it is.
That's going to be my Christmas project. I mean, there's a paper every day coming out.
Really, on glyphosate, not on,
Yeah, on glyphosate being bad.
Nick, can you forward me those? If
Yep.
you have them on links or
It's
whatever?
early on, but it's not looking good for it.
So until that changes.
Until it
That will be
changes.
what we have, because that's what we have going.
Exactly, I
So,
know.
I'll add those conditions in. I just apologize for not having that language in front of me. I just forgot about that, so. Other than that, the only other thing I had is number 21, that markers shall be installed along the no disturbed areas. I spoke with the applicant about that this week a little bit for that 15-foot buffer zone options. I know before we've done split rail fencing, other times we've done, rocks, other times we've done single posts. Been pretty flexible with people that want to come in and put something out there. This applicant in particular said they found an interesting set of what are cedar posts that will last, that can mark that so people know when, you're cutting, you're going from here to here, and from here to here, and you can see it, but it's not.
Connect the dots.
Yeah, it's not as obtrusive as a split rail fence, or not as cumbersome as putting out a bunch of rocks or doing something that you can run over. So, been a little bit flexible with that, but I think we can
So
figure
we're
it out.
okay with the 15-foot buffer zone instead of the 25-foot?
I don't know.
They proved it was historical.
Yeah, it looked like it existed at least enough, though those weren't exactly lined up on the
Yeah,
pictures
it's
that
hard
he.
to say.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know the field.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about the distance.
We could argue that we'd have to have every 3 years, but there's not aerials that are available.
And he doesn't really, he's already got the, net benefit going on. So.
Yeah, if there was not any additional net benefit, then I'd probably
Yeah,
be more upset.
probably, yeah, but I think since there is net
Yeah.
benefit with the moving of the structures and
And the
stuff.
revegetation in that small
Yeah.
area.
So, Do I have a motion to issue as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Ian?
Aye.
Jen, are you recused on this one too?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, Sarah?
Aye.
Ernie? Aye. Andy? Aye. Van? Aye. Mike? Aye. Okay, that motion carries with Commissioner Carberg recused.
We'll be welcoming Jennifer Carver back to the table.
Okay, Salisbury on 18 Brant Point Road.
All right, finally one that's really easy. This was the construction of the deck and the relocation of the patio in land subject to coastal storm flowage with no grading or anything proposed.
Second.
Okay, Ian?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Ernie? Aye. Andy? Aye. Van? Aye. Mike? That motion carries unanimously. Okay, Cooney on 65 Winoma Way.
We didn't close that.
Oh, we
Nope.
didn't close.
Yes, we
Okay.
did.
We did?
Oh,
Yeah.
It was Kosei.
We didn't close Kosei on Cliff Road. Cooney was the one with the deck
yeah,
project on
this-
Winoma Way.
Oh, okay.
On the lot
Sorry.
you guys have bid on apparently 1,000 times.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so sorry, we did close. You're still out there. I just thought you wanted to hear us talk for a while. I had written did not close for some reason.
Well, the good news is I did, so.
Yeah.
But I couldn't really think of a lot of conditions for this one. There's a lot of resource areas.
This one's very similar to the other tricky one earlier. The good thing is they're taking out that outdoor shower and removing a genie bit within the 25
And letting it revegetate back there.
and letting it revegetate back there. And the bad thing is they do require waivers for building within the 50 for sure. I'm kind of on the fence on this one.
Yeah, I don't really like that second story deck.
I'm not crazy about it either.
I don't mind the stuff in front.
No,
Oh, the stuff in
front's
front
kind
is
of
fine,
away,
yeah.
By front, you mean towards the road?
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right, right.
With the, when you have the house blocking the,
Well, I guess in our course of analysis, part of what we'll have to do is discuss whether or not that work is going to have an adverse impact to the resource areas.
Yeah, which
So-
is,
Well, the whole house seems to be like pushing
And-
the limits.
well, it kind of does.
It
It's sitting
does.
right on the edge of that.
this is a good example of cumulative impacts, because we've had, this is the fifth, amendment to this order since I've been on the commission, I think. So, sometimes we've talked about that, because it is part of our regulations on reviewing previous amendments and seeing if you do, by piecemeal, approach an adverse impact. And if there was one that did that, this would be it.
This is probably it, yeah.
Wasn't the deck being erected on existing piles?
No, there's.
No.
That's the other deck or the other side.
The
There's-
front, yeah, the front was an existing pile, but not the back.
There's a new one to the southwest, I guess. I'm trying to think of where it is on the property.
On the side of the house.
It's
there,
on the
right.
side of the
Southwest
house.
corner.
Yeah, southwest corner. And that's within the,
Is that within the confines?
pardon?
Yes.
No,
In the 50.
it is
It's
within
within the 50, not within the 25.
And it's not on existing pilings?
No, it's within
No.
existing lawn area and inside an area that's bounded by a retaining wall. So it's
But there's
inside-
nothing on the ground there.
It's inside of another structural element, which is, makes it kind of extra tricky. Because there's a structure more intrusive to the resource area than what this
Yes, it's
structure
further
would.
back is,
Correct.
yeah.
No.
And it is a very
Which isn't on the
constrained
plan.
lot.
The retaining wall is not on the plan? I don't remember it being approved. But it's obviously there, right? I
Yeah,
it's there.
it's on there, and it seemed to have been on there before, so we went through it a little bit, and everything was sorted out, so that's,
But it's not on the current plan?
there are a few other features that are missing from the plan, too.
Well, is this something that we should not issue an order until we have an updated plan, or, I'm just asking, I'm not trying to be difficult.
No, the plan is sufficient for permitting. in this
Okay.
case. And so looking at the pictures for this one can be helpful too. It's kind of tricky. That sun's killing me. So, I mean, I guess that's my job as administrator to say is if that's the area of problem, what's the adverse effect of the proposal? Sorry, that's just what I have to do. That's the question I'm supposed to ask.
So, but then it's sort of saying when if you're outside of 25 and on a lawn, you should be able to put something there. I mean,
Yeah, it's kind of.
Sorry?
if you're outside the 25 and there's a lawn there, it gives you the right to
Put a
something
structure.
there.
Because there's a whole different
Because it
set of
defeats the whole,
standards for.
defeats the whole 50 thing, if there's a lawn there.
I don't know, you'll have to look at it that it defeats the whole thing in the 50. The protection for resource areas is buffer zones, unless you get into a waiver situation. And so when you look at the waiver situation, you'll think about what would the adverse impact be. And in a case where you have the lawn and you have other structure toward the resource side of this, is it just saying no because we can say no? Or is it going to have some impact on the stability of the coastal bank there? And what's the problem with doing it? And if we see a problem with doing it, if it was to put a nuclear waste plant there, or something, we'd say, well, no, you can't do it. But if it was to put 4 piers to put a deck upstairs on a house.
There's a deck downstairs,
Deck
covering
downstairs.
ground, and then there's a deck upstairs.
Yeah, and whatever's on the plan, then it's up to each of us to weigh whether we see it as having an impact or not.
No, they didn't propose a dry well for the roof runoff here. That was another. I mean, that's one way to.
It'll still run off onto the ground.
So for the mitigation for this, they had, they had proposed the revegetation. That's the other thing when I'm looking at something that I don't think really necessarily automatically deserves a waiver, is if there's mitigation being proposed that offsets it.
Well, that gives you a good feeling about horse trading, but.
Well, for the
if you're
impact
gonna-
onto the
if you're
wetlands.
going to offset, you want to offset some real impacts. And if there are no real impacts, then what are you offsetting?
Well, if you go from lawn, if it's fertilized, is as bad as a deck. But if you're going from infiltrated land where you've got rain falling down and it's actually reaching the groundwater versus covering it with the deck, I mean, the deck is not the same as having a floor. I mean, if it's an open deck.
You'll still get, I think
You still get infiltration in, yeah.
Eventually get in the ground somewhere.
So it comes down to what's the impact of what they're proposing.
That's what I'm saying, and in
I
this
don't
case,
think
there's.
this particular project doesn't have a large impact, but as Sarah was saying, we've been over this site so many times now, all with, relatively,
Bump outs and bump outs.
Well, people are entitled to apply.
Well, they are. But
If they're applying for something that has no impact, and again, we feel good about saying no.
Well, I don't know if it has no impact, it may just have a small impact, but when you start looking at, well, we allowed them to build the shed, we went through.
The fact that the house was built there is an impact.
The entire
Yeah,
house
yeah.
is
The entire house is within the
So
50-foot
really,
setback.
Yeah, the house-
I mean, that's,
You're enlarging a structure which
Shouldn't be
already
built.
has
has
an
an impact.
Yeah,
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know.
yeah, that's a good point.
That we wouldn't
The house
permit
is an impact
nowadays.
itself, it's inside of our current regulation. It's the whole thing.
The whole thing is.
So you're just sort of increasing, you're just,
You're increasing ground cover.
Yeah, so you get carried away with rules for the sake of rules.
I know what you're saying.
for the record, the shed is outside of 50.
Yeah, it is.
But
the whole part that
Okay, so we're going to turn the house into the shed.
Yeah.
I have no doubt this is definitely a tricky site. I just want to be sure that if,
Well, they bought this house with, full knowledge of what their footprint was.
Yeah.
That doesn't change that they're entitled to apply for something.
I agree with that
What
completely.
they've applied for, we all think has negligible impact or no impact. We're just looking for a reason to say, no, don't do it. I'd say, look to yourselves and look there, why you want to do that.
Right.
Hello?
Yeah, yes.
everyone's being pensive, Ian. Being
Everyone's trying to debate about how we feel about this project.
Yeah, well, my question is, how was the house built in the first place? I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding the drawing in front of me, the house is within the 25-foot buffer zone.
Yes, sir.
Or am I misunderstanding?
Is it post pre-78 or just bad earlier commissions? I don't know.
When was it conditioned? Liz, do you know when the house was originally built?
Bad earlier
I think you
commissions.
said 82.
82,
82
yeah.
or 83.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't want to condemn early commissions from the 80s, but
I'm happy to.
houses built in weird spots in the 80s is not a unique situation.
Right.
But it's the house that's there. This is the application process that they have to go through, and our job is to decide whether or not this project is going to have an adverse impact on the resource areas, or if it qualifies, in this case, for the waivers that they're requesting.
Well, I think this particular project will have a pretty small impact. But again, you add it to the cumulative impact of the whole house being there. And
One of our more recent regulations is the 50% rule. And maybe this little addition doesn't lead to that, but did the last two, if you combine,
Well, the thing that's tricky about this 50%
this is segmentation,
is to apply a rule that's a current rule to a structure that was originally permitted and built in 1982.
Oh, I don't mean to that.
Is difficult. I mean, it's one of those that, in this case, the 50%, they're in compliance with. And the thing that makes this one super tricky is the 50% that we're dealing with isn't always what it seems, because on this backside of the house, there are 3 different resource areas that crisscross.
Right.
So they may not be within the 25-foot setback or the 50 from the BVW and maybe from the coastal dune, in which case the coastal dune doesn't have that same 50% requirement. So that's what makes this site extra special, is the fact that the resource areas aren't nice. They're not nice lines that go as they move and they crisscross in here. I mean, you have coastal dune, and then you have a little bit of Barrier Beach, and then BVW that crosses it like 4 times, and the flood zone that comes up into here.
Well, and I wasn't inferring all the way back to 82, it's just the most recent amended order. If we had like 4 or 5 amended orders that kept tacking on 10 feet here.
Did all that up to more than 50% or something like that?
He could, that's how you encroach into.
Is that what we have? Is that-
I don't know, I'm just wondering that.
I would say that under our local interpretation that the project does propose is not approaching that threshold, simply because the lot is huge, and a lot of it is resource areas and buffer zones, that 50% of that would be an immense amount of area. I mean, that's...
Okay, I was just asking.
It's the one thing that also makes this site kind of unique in the sense that we're looking at kind of the upper third of this site, and then the rest of the site is...
unbuildable.
Essentially.
yeah, I think that's another thing to consider. It's a huge lot.
Yeah, no, that's all, I was just asking. Yep. Yeah.
I wouldn't say that the whole thing's unbuildable without digging and delineating the whole back half. You may be able to find an area that has a 50-foot setback where you can put a shed. I don't know, but...
It wasn't easy to put that shed in, I remember.
It was
No.
not easy to put that shed in.
No.
Well,
So Andy, what do
do
you
I
think?
have a motion to issue this as drafted? No motion. Okay. I guess we don't want to issue it.
Let's stew on this one as well.
Yes.
I mean, are there other conditions that people would like to see that would make it different, or...
I think they've kind of bought what they bought.
If
So are
we
we
think
thinking,
that-
do we want to deny all that?
If we think that that work on the water side of the house would have a greater than negligible effect on the interest we protect, we ought to be able to articulate something. And if we don't think so, then we ought to make the motion to, we ought to go ahead and issue it.
If you were going to make it a positive order, I would make it very clear that you're removing a outdoor shower and steps that are within the 25, which I think they're within the 25, not the 50.
So move with those
Oh, I'm
inclusions.
not making that motion. I'm just saying, if you're going to justify in your mind that it's okay to build within the 50, which I'm not saying it is, then you would have to make it abundantly clear that only if stuff was knocked off your house would you be allowed to add stuff
Can
on.
you articulate a greater than negligible impact that this proposal is going to have on the interests that we protect?
I don't know if adding another, 200 square feet of less percolation is or not. That's why I'm on the fence.
Well, the area that's really getting requested for a waiver is 96 square feet.
Yeah.
96 square
And then if
feet.
you add maybe the very slice on the front, you might get to 105. I mean, that's,
Which part of that is already covered? Or is there steps and no, see that?
There's the little steps, and then that's a window well, and that's it.
Yeah, so there's a
Yeah.
lot of that's already covered, too.
I mean,
Oh,
I think if you
window well
We're
is,
actually talking a pretty small
80
area
square
there.
feet.
I think you're probably looking in
But
between.
this is quite a bit.
But there's already
That's existing.
deck underneath
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, you're,
Right, and that's.
you're probably looking at about
I don't know,
60 to
mostly
65 square
Square
feet
feet.
new
Yeah.
A deck,
on the,
That's
for the
it.
new one.
yeah.
And you're removing,
I think it's getting to be
I
pretty
think
de
the problem
Yeah.
is that we
here.
sat on this before, to be honest with you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it could be the.
Make the motion to issue the order, Mr. Chairman, with the inclusion of the specifics that Commissioner O'Shea just mentioned.
Removing of the shower.
Shower?
Shower and the steps.
And
yeah.
the steps and revegetating.
And revegetating.
All right, I'll add all that to the
Because
list.
that has to be the mitigation. I mean, there's times that I'll issue a waiver for something
Mitigation
within,
for,
the mitigation for building within the 50 is revegetating, removing the steps and the
foreseeable
outdoor.
impact of the building in the
Allowing.
50s.
They're mitigating for, they're asking for something, for a structure within the 50, and they're actually proposing a 2-to-1 mitigation for it. You could say that, or something similar to that.
Well, that sounds reasonable.
I mean, does it?
I can add that to the waiver. That's no problem.
Okay. So we have a motion to issue as amended. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Ian,
A reluctant aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Sarah,
Equally reluctant, aye.
Ernie, aye, Andy,
I'll give it a nod.
Ben, Mike.
Making it a unanimous aye, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that motion carries unanimously.
Okay.
All right, one more, and it's a lot more straightforward than all the rest.
Right?
Thanks for staying with us.
If they ask for a flower pot,
we're
tell
lucky.
them no.
Okay, 12 Oak Hollow Lane.
All right, there's no waivers. I had no conditions for this one. That's what I got.
Oh, this was the driveway.
This was the driveway. There is a cottage that's inside 100, but it's outside of 50.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Move
This
to
one's
issue.
local only.
Second.
Okay, Ian,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
Ernie, aye, Andy,
Aye.
Pam, Mike.
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. I think we should put in the order for Winona Way that no additional building of any kind can ever occur in the slot.
Okay, so that's that. Anything else we need to talk about?
No, we'll save the fun for next time. For
So next Wednesday?
Yeah, be prepared.
Yeah.
Well, I will ask, this would be my one question in preparation for that. Is there anything, other than council being here, is there anything that you guys would like me to prepare for you guys to have as a cheat sheet or a summary?
I
Or
would sure like to have Mr. McConnell's initial presentation to the commission where, as I'm recalling it now, he said, I'm asking, the Equipment Farm Association is asking for 3 things.
Okay.
And the applicant said yes, yes, and yes to them, and then we haven't seen him since then.
What other things I've already forgotten most of that?
I think I just need to go reread everything.
And I would also say that maybe town council would look over some of the stuff that the Quidnet Squam attorney had presented and telling us we can't do this and we can't do that because we don't have the right to maybe see if he concurs with that. And in this case, it would be simple. We just say we can't do it, goodbye.
Well, the big trick is the emergency certification, the fact that this is an NOI.
would a list of applicable performance standards be
That
helpful?
would be hugely helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to do it in my head, and
All
I
right.
know
I'll
it's
prepare a list
205,
and
1,
I'll pull them
2,
out so
3.
we're not teaming through regulations. It's not part of the record, it's me snipping out regulations for you guys, so it's
Right.
a
Well,
help
and I'd
desk.
open it up tonight, but it would be helpful to have all of those.
Sure.
And
That'd be
for
cool.
the
We can
coastal
put 'em up
bank
on
and
the-
the coastal beach.
If they're even, if there is a facility for projecting out, for people, everybody to see.
Oh, absolutely. I could put together a PowerPoint for that.
The adverse impact question and the land under the ocean and the scenic view.
Yep.
Sure. Well, we'll get to discuss. So I think what I'll do is I'll probably have a list of the resource areas and their appropriate interests, because not all of them always apply. So we'll list, like, Coastal Bank will have storm damage prevention, flood control, recreation, whatever ones are listed. We'll have that separate so you guys can have that in front of you so we know what we're doing. And then the performance standards I'll have separate so you guys can see those, but they'll just be snippets from the regs. They're not really public record part. It's just sheets for you guys to work off of. So through your deliberations, you can look down and say, when we're thinking about the coastal bank, we need to be thinking about it in terms of how it impacts these things.
Well, we
So-
shouldn't be forgetting our enforcement action, too.
Oh, no.
So when we vote one way or the other on this, we also have the drain, the excess sand on the fronting beach, which if we positively did it, that we go to plantings, and if we ask them to remove everything, then we would hope that would be returned to the beach, probably. What are the two other the gravel, the toe of the bluff, which is part of the drain.
That's part of the drain.
And what were the other, there's four things.
The cement plugs.
The cement plugs.
The cement plugs.
Yeah, which worked in
So
there.
we'll address.
Okay, I'm just reminding.
One of the things we're going to have to do with an order, especially if it's a positive order, is clean up all of those things too.
Yeah.
So that'll take some doings. So I think what we'll probably do is we'll have our initial deliberation, and hopefully, this is just my hopes, when we have it and we go through those, that we'll get to a point of we would like to draft a certain kind of order.
Yep.
Then I'll have essentially a week to draft it, come back to our regular meeting,
Yep.
talk about it again, and then if we have to carry it forward, we still have one more week where we can issue. So
Okay.
that's my fingers crossed. That's my hopes. So,
Yep.
but that's it. And I think that we don't have any other closed public hearings. I mean, there was Cose's Beach Stairs, but they're going to provide us some new info, so we'll deal with that when we get it.
So do we have any enforcement actions?
I was just going to give you an update. We sent out the ones we talked about last time. We clarified the one on Cascade Course Way a little bit more. That one relates specifically to those bags were to have been installed in the plantings and just fronted by individual posts, and it's turned into a flat fence. So that's what that one specifically related to, the one on the large project on Pocomo, the enforcement that we did.
I'm sorry, so what happened with that?
They had installed a fence to hold their core tubes, and their permit only allows for posts every like 6 feet, and they
Right.
filled it in with a straight fence. So
Right.
it's not in compliance. I haven't received any of my green cards back yet for the other 3 too, to deal with those. The only other one that's kind of started is those folks on Wall Street have finally started to remove their unpermitted retaining structures. Apparently, our letter threatening fines has spurred them into action.
Good.
So
Well done.
hopefully they'll be done shortly. Other than that, as soon as I hear back from those people, I'll set up their date to appear, or when they're going to send someone in, or I'm sure I'll hear from them. But sometimes mail is slower than others.
We
Sometimes
still
it's
get
tricky.
some potential enforcement orders on the other side of Pocomo, the side I'm looking at with
Yes.
the bizarre plantings
The
and
bizarre
pots
plantings
and
and
the
the weird-
terracing
yeah.
and
That's
the
all.
escalator and stuff over there.
That's a whole other nightmare in and of itself.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't really have any update. I've been leaving it on there because we have a few open ones, so don't really have a lot of big updates on that one.
Okay, so let's go to reports. CPC.
CPC met yesterday. I wasn't included because apparently Ken Bergran said that he had a quorum without me participating by telephone, so I don't know what took place.
Okay.
At least you're honest.
Anti-immediacy,
No meeting.
Mosquito control,
Haven't had a meeting.
coastal management plan.
We're done.
Okay, we can scratch that one.
We are done. We did a nice presentation.
I'm going to take that one off the list.
Commissioners' comments.
One walk through the Gardner property the other day with great
Oh,
being
yeah.
built. And they, I don't know where they're at this point, but they parked their Bobcat right in the middle of the wetland. I mean, it's
Really?
basically they're crushing crushing the,
Wow.
backing up over the old walkway, and this thing was abandoned and just parked in the dead center of the wetland.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, wow, you know.
That's definitely a
Pretty
phone
messy
call.
setup.
Yeah.
If you see that again,
Yeah.
call me immediately.
Yeah.
If you
Is it
could.
still there, though, right?
I haven't been there for, so that was,
Wow.
it was, a couple days ago.
It's probably.
Well, the impact might still be noticeable.
Yeah.
Well, they just sort of, they're driving this bobcat on top of the old walkway.
Why? To
They shouldn't be,
Well, I think
right?
it's got the vibrator on it or something.
You gotta pull it out,
The-
probably, to sink
To sink the metal rods or screws that they're putting in.
I'll talk
They're
to,
on top of the old one.
Yeah, they're on top of the old one, but it's basically getting crushed by it.
Oh.
But I
thought
walked
that
up,
was all supposed to be done by
basically
hand.
you know, it was the end of the day, no one there, and this thing's like in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I thought it was supposed to be done by hand.
yeah.
We
Well,
need to pull
I'll
the-
check,
I know there's a separate-
I'll check the
but I didn't
permit.
realize there's a bobcat attached to the end of it.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't need
Double check that.
Yeah, I'll check the permit,
Oh,
and I'll get in touch with,
in the swamp.
That's significant.
I'll get in touch with the land bank,
Yeah, it's
check their permit.
yeah.
Anything else? To the staff?
I don't really have a lot to add, just wanted to, again, say,
Sorry.
now that we've actually closed the public hearing on the Beast, thank you for your time and all your efforts.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
be ready for probably what's going to be a interesting deliberation, to say the
Yeah,
least.
no kidding, to say the
So.
least.
So don't we still have one other open one at least?
Yes, we'll deal with that. I would also say, now that we've closed that public hearing, be very careful not to take in information from people or do anything that you feel is maybe questionable towards that process. Because I'm sure that people will call, people will send emails. It seems to be what all these parties like to do for this one, so. Please use caution. When in doubt, call me. I'll help you out. Or if you think it's in question, send it to me, and we'll pass it on to whoever we need to if you're not sure, and we'll deal with it, but then at least it's in the open and clear. So, because if we learned earlier from public records request, emails and anything are certainly subject to people filing public information requests on, so be careful.
Yeah, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say no.
Other than that, thanks.
No.
All right.
All right.
And we're done before 7:30, so that's a winner.
Adjourn. Motion to
Move to
adjourn.
close. Oh, yeah, second.
Thanks,
hers.
Ian.
Thank you, Ian. You sent.
Aloha. Have fun.
Oh, boy.
Wise
You
guy,
have to
huh?
you have to show me up for going to New Orleans by going to Hawaii. I see how it is. Say hi to everybody. Say hi to Laura.
I will.
Okay.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
He said it was 11 earlier.
We're
what, 4? Or they-
It's 5 or 6. I think it's 5 hours.
5?
It's so Pacific.
Well, I might like tonight.
Probably more than 5 hours.
It might be. It's way out there.
Well, yeah, but I think it's, yeah.
David is
It might be 8